This story is concerning wildlife. It's concerning a rhino.
A rhino?
Right? Yeah, a
okay.
rhino. I used to live in Kenya when I was about 5 or 6 years old.
Okay.
And we were in this wildlife park in a grey Morris Minor. This rhino started chasing us. There's me and my sister in the back seat.
Right.
It was like something out of Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
We were turning around saying, "Believe it, Dad. Just put your foot down, Dad. We're in a field. Put your foot down." This rhino was chasing us.
One from Mark here in Derby. Went on holiday for our first romantic holiday to Tunisia years ago. Decided to take my girl into a petting zoo. I got a bag of food to feed the animals. A giant goat then went for me, putting its front legs over my shoulders and proceeding to headbutt me over a fence into one of the pens, covering me in the food and making my nose bleed. I got out of the pen, then the goat and all his mates attacked me again, sending me running and screaming like a girl out of the zoo, with my girlfriend rolling with laughter on the floor.
A tarantula climbed up the bottom of the bed on the sheet.
Yeah.
And it walked all the way up. It's eyeball to eyeball.
Wow.
And I thought to myself, what am I going to do when it climbs over my face? But then a miracle happened. It raised its 2 front legs and waved them around. And then it turned around and walked down the side of the sheet.
Boris Johnson had been attacked by an ostrich. The former PM was enjoying a safari trip with his family when the bird leaned into his car and went oi oi and pecked his hand. In footage shared online, he quickly jerked from the ostrich. Don't dirty minds away from the ostrich, and shouted, "Oh, Christ, get hell," before driving off. And so I just set it out there. Have you been attacked by an animal? When I was about 7, says Trevor Jenkins, on holiday in Spain in the 70s, a monkey pulled my long hair. It was long because it was the 70s. I was in floods of tears. And as a family car drove out the car park, an elephant ripped off the car mirror. We got the message. Spanish animals aren't to be trusted. Jeremy, Brittany here from the United States. I was spurred by a rooster in my right foot a few years ago. Spurred? How do you get spurred by a rooster?
One here from Dan in Hampshire. Morning, Mike. As an Aussie that has been dive-bombed by our version of the magpie, which is much bigger, every springtime, the folk in...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good morning to you. Welcome to the show. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. It's coming up to 3 minutes past 10 o'clock. Absolutely great to have your company, whether you're listening on DAB Plus radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device. Great to have your company. An awful lot to talk about over the next few hours, and in particular in this hour. We will be talking more about, yes, that ongoing trans issue, but it's such a bitter political dispute now because the Tory leader, Kemi Badenoch, who, by the way, was on absolute fire in the Commons yesterday. She's demanded that Keir Starmer apologise to women who lost their jobs or harassed in the row over the equality law, including, by the way, some of his own MPs. Rise, Rosie Duffield. This comes after the PM finally broke his silence, just before we went on air yesterday, on the Supreme Court's biological sex ruling and dropped his belief, we are told later by Number 10, that trans-identified men are women. Keir Starmer hasn't actually said it yet. I'm imagining that Kemi Badenoch will be raising that at PMQ today. We will take that live for you at midday just to hear those first few exchanges. Meanwhile, J.K. Rowling has accused Keir Starmer of showing a lack of remorse, says she is one of millions of women disgusted and vows never to forget, bearing in mind she was a big Labour donor, long-time Labour supporter, and, well, he seems to have lost lost her as a supporter. Also, small matter of the economy going down the drain. The International Monetary Fund has slashed its growth forecast, well, for most of the world, but particularly for the UK, and warned that Chancellor Rachel Reeves can't just blame Donald Trump and his tariffs for Britain's faltering economic performance, saying it's largely down to things like energy prices here. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, hi, Ed Miliband. Let's talk about net zero, shall we? Also, happy St George's Day. Keir Starmer has issued a St George's Day rallying cry to the country in the never-ending fight to reclaim our flag, he says. The PM launched a savage attack on those who sow division, and he referred to those who took part in the Southport riots carrying the national flag. This, of course, comes just a week before local elections, when Nigel Farage's Reform Party does look set to do very well, and particularly in some Labour seats. Also, the Ministry of Justice has said it is vital that pre-sentencing court reports must consider the historical background and culture of ethnic minority criminals before judges decide their punishment. This is different from the sentencing guidelines, which were overturned or agreed to be rowed back on by the Sentencing Council last month. This is actually about what the reports, when they do get done, are actually about. And so basically, if you are historically, you're Afro-Caribbean and therefore you're in generations gone by, you're the victim of slavery, that needs to be taken into account when they're deciding your sentence. Can you believe how insane that is? Well, that's what's happening in our courts right now. So we'll be talking more about that and plenty more besides. And joining me for all the chat today, I'm delighted to say, is Claire Pearsall, former Conservative Government Advisor. Good morning once again to you.
Good morning.
Lovely to see you. Before we get into, big battle over trans, big battles over the economy, which at the end of the day, as much as I care about the culture issues, and I do, you may have noticed this over the years, everybody, but actually the cost of living is rather crucial. And again, even with Donald Trump's election, at the end of the day, it's cost of living that really decides elections. Yeah. It's the economy, stupid. But the culture, there is an element where culture does feed into a lot of that. And it's terms of your confidence in your country, your belief in your country, your feeling that you belong, the feeling that the country is somewhere that represents you and you're a part of. Now, I know we pretty much all feel that during football tournaments or during the Olympics. I care very, very little for someone doing long jump. Good on you, brilliant, do your best, but I'm not sure it really matters the great scheme of things. I suppose you could argue kicking a ball, but actually it is the great passion. Yeah. It's something more important than most things for most people. But this is when we fly our flag, and this is when people get pride in the flag. And it's almost on the left, the only time you can fly a flag. Otherwise, you get people like Labour MP Emily Thornberry, who certainly expected to have been, Foreign Secretary, sneering at people who fly the flag. Keir Starmer today, and it's St George's Day, obviously. Happy St George's Day, everybody. But Keir Starmer has called on the English to reclaim our flag for our country, wrench it out of the hands of those who want to divide this nation. He talked about people carrying the flag as they went into, attack mosques and the like, and asylum hotels during riots in post-Southport last July. He's talking about how, it's a flag that unites us, and he's harked back to, and it was a great time, 1996, when we had hosted the Euros. The atmosphere was awesome, was it not? Do we need to reclaim our flag for our country?
No, because to reclaim something means that you've lost it. And as far as I'm concerned, we haven't lost it. And as for wrenching it out of the hands of bad people, you try walking down Whitehall with a flag on St George's Day. I think the police will be having a good, long, hard look at you as just to say, what are you doing? Why are you wearing it?
You're probably safer walking around Whitehall with a Hamas flag.
Perfectly so.
I would definitely carry a Hamas flag, not an issue.
Yep.
Hezbollah, that's fine too. Trans flag, absolutely fine. Yep. Despite the fact that trans pride flag, by the way, is it's misogynistic, it's racist, it's homophobic, you name it. It's got BLM in and everything. It's not the rainbow flag of old that celebrated people's sexuality. Now it's an anti-flag. Yes. But the England flag, definitely. Yeah. Oh, definitely looks questionable now. Who are you? I don't think anyone could forget that tweet from Emily Thornberry when she was Shadow Foreign Secretary, wasn't she? Or Shadow something. And she's a ghastly woman. My favourite things I was told by a former colleague at still a good friend at a well-known radio station you may have heard of, said he once got about a 3 or 4 hour journey with Emily Thornberry to a question time or something like that, and she spent the entire journey explaining how much she hated me. I've never been prouder. Literally never been prouder of anything. Being hated that much by Emily Thornberry is a badge of honour for me.
Absolutely.
Feelings mutual, lady. Feelings mutual. Actually, I don't hate her. I just feel sorry for her. But having such mad views about everything. But when she tweeted, it wasn't even a comment, was it? It was just a picture. It was a white van outside a house with loads of big England flag, massive big England flag, and it was sort of during the local elections, and it was just so contemptuous.
It was. It was a house in Rochester in Kent, so not far away from where I live. She posted it up and said, "Image from Rochester."
Oh, that was it, yeah.
And that was it. And everyone just went, what's wrong with it.
And I imagine if she'd shown it round her Islington dinner parties, they'd all
they
have
would
gone,
have
oh, I know, how ghastly. All those ghastly working-class white people who like their flag. But isn't this issue? When Keir Starmer does stuff like this, a week ahead of the local elections, when everyone knows that, the predictions hold that Reform UK will do very well in different parts of the country. I mean, Tories, they're fighting seats largely, the parties, which were, from the Tory heyday. They were last fought then. 2021, post-lockdown, or post one of the lockdowns. And so there are a lot of seats that would be lost by the Tories, no matter who was leading, where they were in the polls, they'd be losing them. But he's trying to sort of get onto, Reform turf. And there's no doubt Reform are trying to get onto Labour turf, talk about nationalising steel and other industries. And so there's that ongoing thing. But at the end of the day, I don't believe that Keir Starmer is proud of his national flag. I don't even think he's proud of his country. No. I think he is someone who is signed up to the view that our past is awful. They might say, OK, we're not going to do reparations because we haven't got a spare trillion. Because that's what you're talking about. But fundamentally, he feels a little bit awkward about being white. Feels a bit awkward about English, a bit awkward about the traditions of this country. He's a moral relativist. He genuinely seems to think that, all cultures are equal, and so multiculturalism is a good thing. He thinks diversity is our strength. He's totally rewriting British history. He's not. If you don't believe that we have a morally superior culture in the West, which we do, where people have greater equality and fairness and liberty than anywhere else. It's not perfect, but it's better than the alternatives. That our amazing tradition and history, that we have been largely a cause for good in the world rather than a cause for bad, although, we've done some bad things. Slavery was bad, but every other empire did slavery. We're the only one that ended it, etc., at great personal financial cost to the nation. The soft power we have of the English language, the culture, everything that we've given around the world. I am the Industrial Revolution. I am so proud to be British. I feel so lucky to be British. I mean, half Irish heritage, half English heritage. I'm born in England. I'm English. Okay, I'm English. I'm more Scottish than a lot of the Scots who think they're Scottish. That's for sure. But I mean, I am proud, and I think most British people or most English people are. But I don't think Keir Starmer is. And they will they'll be everyone's very proud of St David's Day and St Patrick's Day and St Andrew's Day. They're all a bit embarrassed about St George's Day because, the racists. And that's what they think people who carry the England flag are, racists.
He's just not authentic. The message that came out from Downing Street behind his little podium, he looked awkward, he looked embarrassed. Yeah. It wasn't authentic. And it was apologetic, as you say. He doesn't like to be English. He doesn't really like to be white, I don't think. I think he's just embarrassed of everything. Yeah. And the fact is that he's U-turned because he didn't know what a woman was to begin with, and now he's had to admit that he was wrong, but only slightly wrong. It was a really bad, unauthentic apology for that.
He's probably embarrassed to be a man. I don't know why he doesn't just identify as a woman, because he seems to make him a woman anyway. Well, I want to hear from you. I'm really fascinated by this because it's not. I realise it's not the biggest, most momentous story of the day, but I'm really intrigued to know your views. After Keir Starmer called down on the English to reclaim our flag for our country on St George's Day, wrench it out of the hands of those who want to divide this nation. What is your reaction to that? Do we need to reclaim it? Well, isn't it Keir Starmer and his lot who've been the problem, basically thinking that anyone flying the flag was a racist bigot, and I mean, and again, what they consider racist, isn't what most people consider racist. Actually, just people saying, we should celebrate our culture and expect people to assimilate and go on, kind of the basic view of most countries, actually, until about 10 years ago. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000, text the word talk and your message to 87222. Send us a message on X at talkTV, and of course calls are charged at the national rate. Text cost 1, standard network rate message. Let's talk about the economy. As I mentioned, it is the economy stupid that decides elections. Rachel Reeves has been warned by the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. She's over in Washington for this major big meeting of all the Treasury ministers around the key countries around the world, that she can't just blame Trump's tariffs for the faltering economy. The IMF has slashed the growth forecast for the world, but has also particularly slashed it for the UK. We're now expected to just get 1.1% of growth. That's down by 0.5% since the start of the year. And the IMF chief economist has said basically domestic factors like surging utility bills, energy prices because of net zero, and higher government borrowing costs. We had the latest borrowing figures, and we borrowed more last month than was expected in the billions. And in the wake of the autumn budget, were the UK's biggest problem. So, international factors are, Ukraine still, the tariffs, but fundamentally it's the government's policies that are the problem. Very telling.
It is. Domestic issues by far outweigh the potential of Trump's tariffs to affect the economy. And I think she's got 3 days now over in Washington to try and make some sense, I suppose, of what the financial situation is, try and persuade others they might like to invest in the United Kingdom and that we're not a complete basket case of a country. But one of the most interesting things I read is later at a summit, she is speaking on reimagining global energy. That's what she's going out there to talk about.
She's going to talk about it like this as well.
Windmill and a few solar panels.
They're insane. They're insane. They're absolutely mad. They're still... Again, I say I don't think Ed Miliband makes it to the next election, probably not the next year, because they're going to have to dump all this stuff. But this is the thing. They wait until they're forced, whether it's the trans issue, whether it's net zero. They literally wait until they're dragged kicking and screaming out of the darkness into the light of cold reality, and then they deal with it. But I mean, I think the autumn budget is going to be an absolute carnage of a car crash in the autumn.
Yeah, it will. Given that the last statement budgets that we had from the Chancellor has caused an awful lot of these problems. The one that we did have in October, was it October? Seems like such a long time ago. So that has caused a lot of domestic issues. Yeah. Add on to that the spring statement, which just piled more grief onto us. Yeah. The economy isn't growing, despite the Chancellor suggesting that it is definitely going to grow and it's all going to be fine.
Well, again, this is a Chancellor who called in regulators. I demand your ideas for growth. I mean, that's literally not their job. It's the opposite of their job. They our businesses are creating. I can't even. These people are so. I do think there are differences. You can have different views and different political views. I've voted for many different parties, and you can say, like, I think this idea might work better. I think that idea might work. You might change that policy from that party. But when you are literally thinking we're going to get growth, but we're going to add £25 billion in tax on businesses and add extra regulation. I mean, this is the part that, by the way, they insist they're into free trade. So it's kind of be pushing free trade. Like, no, you want to go back into the EU. The EU is a trading bloc where you have free trade within and impose massive tariffs on everyone outside. Yeah. They're not into free... They lie about everything.
But this was also the party that said all of their plans were fully costed and they wouldn't have to borrow.
Lol.
That went well, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Events to buy events. Yeah, but for Kings, that's fine in politics, except when the events are actually created by you because of your idiot policies. Let's also talk about, the big story of the last 2 days, the last week. And this is Starmer finally, apparently, we're told, admitting that actually, trans women are not women. Except we didn't actually say that. He said he accepted the Supreme Court legal definition of what a woman is, what we all knew already. But he didn't say that he doesn't know. He had said previously he believes that trans women are women. He actually said those words because he's insane. No, because you have to be insane to believe that a man is a woman. You have to be insane to, blue is green. No, it's not. But genuinely, it was Downing Street that said this statement. Now, Kempi Badenoch, as I say, was absolutely on fire yesterday in the Commons. I have to say, she absolutely went for it. Yeah. And we know this is an issue she has been very solid on. She spoke out often, actually, without permission from Number 10 when she was a cabinet minister on this issue as Women's Inequalities Minister. She was absolutely going for it. She's demanded that he apologise to women. I mean, people don't realise how many women, and we are in the hundreds, possibly in thousands, who lost their jobs, lost their livelihoods, who were, taken their voice taken off social media over the issue of what is a woman, And he was perpetrating a lot of that. Former Director of Public Prosecutions, former top barrister, and he didn't know what a woman was.
He used the dictionary definition. That's how bad this has become. He can't make up words for himself. He can't say, actually, I was wrong, I've looked at it, this is it. He's just said he's agreed with the Supreme Court decision and he gave the dictionary definition of a woman. That's
Do you think he's ever actually believed that a man is a woman?
I think he doesn't know what he believes because
doesn't believe
got
anything.
so tied up. No, I don't think he does, and I think that is half your problem. You have a Prime Minister who doesn't actually believe in anything. There is no strategy behind his prime ministerial role. He just blunders from thing to thing and then tries to fix whatever it is that he's
What does the focus group
broke.
say now?
Yeah, and
But there was
whatever is
never a
broken-
focus group. There was never a poll that said that most women, most men, or sorry, most people thought any of this nonsense. They always thought it was mad.
No, they did think it was mad because most people are pretty sane and they know what a man and a woman are and they know the differences between them.
I mean, they really, really do. It's so bad.
basic.
I still love your thoughts on this. Love your thoughts on Reeves and the economy. It turns out it's down to her. That is the issue why we are facing that downgraded growth. I want to hear from you about Kemi Badenoch going in hard on the Keir Starmer. We're going to be taking the start of PMQs live at midday and then getting reaction from Sharon Davies, a long-standing campaigner on this issue. Up next, they're going to get to your calls about, well, St George's Day and the flag, and Keir Starmer calling on the English to reclaim our flag for our country. Why is it that every other constituent part of the United Kingdom is able to fly their flag and very, very proudly, and no one questions it? But if you fly the England flag, people like Keir Starmer think you're probably a racist bigot. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all that. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Can pretty much guarantee most years somebody will be murdered.
Yes.
Now
there were 2 last year, I think, weren't there?
Yeah. So somebody name me another event anywhere in the country where it's pretty much guaranteed there will be murder and those events are allowed to continue.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about drug deaths at festivals and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I'm talking about
an organised event.
Yeah, an organised event where murder is most likely to happen, because I can't think of another one.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense. 10:24 is the time. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Claire Pearsall still here. always talking common sense. Her party often doesn't, let's be honest, but she does. Former Conservative government advisor. Let's go straight to your messages and your calls coming in about the England flag on St George's Day. PM calling on the English to reclaim our flag for our country, take it out of the hands of those who want to sow division in our nation, he says. I think it's people like you that do that, by the way, Prime Minister. Eleanor says, I didn't think you could even walk down the street with the St George's flag without getting arrested. Point you made earlier about Whitehall. Rick says he's absolutely bricking it over the threat reform poses. I haven't heard bricking it in a long time. That's a great phrase. Fred says absolute rubbish from Starmer, a bit rich coming from a man who's literally divided the nation since coming to power. Nick agrees, you muppet, you divide our nation. Tracy, I'm loving your messages today, guys. Tracy says, every time this Prime Minister opens his mouth, he just gets worse. Tony says he's clearly the one dividing the nation. Starmer is only pretending to be patriotic because of reform. I don't believe for a moment he actually ever feels patriotic. See? Jim says he's doing an excellent job of dividing the nation all by himself. I mean, everyone's saying pretty much the same thing. Susan is on the line in Dorset. Hello, Susan.
Hello, Julia. Hello. Good morning to you and your viewers.
Oh, what do you want to say?
Well, I'm just astounded that Keir Starmer can actually turn around and say, we need to take our flag back. We've always had our flag.
Thank you.
It's him that was telling the police, or the police commissioner was telling the policemen, snatch the flags out of their hands.
Yeah.
They were walking up the street, and anybody that had a St George's flag, a Union Jack, they were told to move away, take the flag away from them. If anybody has divided this country, it is Keir Starmer and his lunatic government that has literally divided this country.
Yeah.
They've made us.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing, and it's that sort of them and us an issue, and again, and just you say two-tier policing, two-tier justice, and we've seen again and again. Doesn't matter, it doesn't matter, if you turn up to, with certain flags or certain placards at a protest, you're fine, and if you and others, including the England flag, you're considered a problem.
Oh, if you've got a jihadist flag and you're going down the road, or a trans flag, mate, you're in there.
Off you go. Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. It is. I want to think that near the end of my road in North London, remember a few years ago where those pro-Palestinian activists drove all the way to London, like 2 or 3 hours away, and drove down High Street shouting with a loud hailer they were going to rape Jewish women and girls, and with waving Palestinian flags. Fully identified, licence plate, on video, everything. Never actually been charged with a crime. Identified, never actually been charged with a crime. Now, if they'd been carrying England flags, they would have been charged, wouldn't they?
They go to jail.
Yeah.
Because Keir Starmer said that. He said that last September or last July when all the riots went off. Get rid of them. They're all far right. Yep. They've all got flags in their hand. They're all far right. Well, I'm 72 years old. I live in Dorset, and I must be far right because I believe in everything that is British.
Yeah, I know. I think it's really strange that people aren't proud of our country. We mock. A lot of people mock the US. USA. I like that Americans are proud of their country. Often I think they're a bit too proud. They're completely unaware that, other countries are also have democracy and free speech and things like that. But there we are. But Susan, great call. Thank you very much indeed. I would love to get Susan in a room with Keir Starmer.
Can you imagine?
He would be so. He would just be so awkward, wouldn't he? She just gave him little bit of education.
Definitely.
Let's go to Georgina, who's in London. Hello, Georgina.
Good morning, my darling. I just thought I'd give a call. I'm absolutely spitting bullets at the moment after hearing Keir Starmer saying he's going to take our flag back. How dare he? Keir Starmer is the bigoted instigator that has made it nigh on impossible to wave or show any of our British flags without fear of reprisals of causing racial disharmony. Yep. This man is a hater of all things British. He's taken away our identity, our culture, our very Britishness at its core. He has had free rein to eradicate our very essence, and now he's got the audacity to say he will take our flag back when it's him who's taken it away in the first place. How dare he?
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. Every single word. And this is the thing. Is like when they talk about, cultural diversity and diversity is our strength and moral relativism, they say, all cultures are equal and valuable and blah, blah. When they do that, they actually undermine our culture. When even, again, I'm an atheist, but when they get statements from the king on Easter Sunday about various different religions and taking from Islam and Judaism, like, no, I'm sorry. No, you're the head of the Church of England. You need to be talking about that. You do not get other religious leaders constantly going on about how great other religions are. Of course, people should work in peace, but that is so much a part of our culture. The reason why, there's so many reasons why our Judeo-Christian culture and our history have got us to where we are right now, to why we haven't suffered, violent revolutions like many other countries, why we have democracy, why we have freedom of speech, why we were, the start of the Industrial Revolution. That is from British and English culture. And I find it extraordinary if people don't recognise that.
Well, every other flag, every other religion comes before the British and Christianity in the eyes of Keir Starmer.
Oh, absolutely.
He is a danger to British culture. He is a danger to the British way of life and British civilization. Honestly, words, I am a woman who has quite a vast vocabulary, and words fail me for this man. There is not a word made to describe this man.
Not a word that Georgina can say on air that I wouldn't have to beep out. Put it that way. Georgina, I have to leave it there, but I can hear your fury. I can absolutely hear it. Georgina, always love speaking to you. Georgina's in London there talking to us. Claire Pearsall, your reaction to that? I mean, look, that's visceral. That is visceral, that anger.
It is, and I think people are right to be angry because you've got a Prime Minister who doesn't love this nation, is telling everybody else that they must do something. And it's like, but we've never lost that. We've had pride. We still have pride. We just want to be allowed to get on with it.
It's not just that you don't have pride and we already did. You've been in, you think we shouldn't be. You've actually told us you told us that we haven't got anything to pride of. British culture is, and Western liberal culture is the most superior, morally superior culture in the world. End of. Full stop. This is it. And if you don't believe that, well, go and try living somewhere that doesn't have it and see how well that works out for you. In particular, by the way, those trans for Palestine. Good luck with that, folks. We'll see you later. 10:31 is the time. Up next, going to be talking to a man who I'm sure owns a number of England flags. Mark Littlewood, who's Director of Popular Conservatism, also going to be talking about the latest crime and justice madness, two-tier justice, where basically, if your family were the descendants of slaves, then that should be taken into account when you're sentenced. I kid you not. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer, and Claire Pearsall as well joining us. Let's talk about all things political with Mark Littlewood now. He's the Director of Popular Conservatism and joins us. Very good morning to you, Mark.
Good morning, Julia. Good to be with you.
I just want to check before we go any further. Do you want us to reclaim the England flag on St George's Day from those awful people who sow division, according to the Prime Minister?
Completely ludicrous, isn't it? I mean, I don't think the Prime Minister understands what a flag represents. Flags are, by definition, exclusive. They're not inclusive. They show a difference, right? It's why Brits wave the Union Jack and the French wave the tricolor. If you believe in a society which is only about inclusion, then, well, you might as well just wave, you know, a picture of the globe.
We know what flag that Keir Starmer prefers to wave. I believe it's blue with yellow stars on.
Yeah, it could well be that, or some rainbow concoction of some sort.
Well, yes, indeed. How damaging do you think the trans madness has been for Labour? I mean, I think it's been pretty damaging for the Tories because they were in power for 14 years, and although the current leader, Kemi Badenoch, has been totally sound on this, came out fighting yesterday. Hopefully, she's going to come out fighting at PMQs today as well. But I mean, basically, you know, Tories sat and watched all this happening under their watch and did not act, and I'm still furious with them for that. But Labour has been so divided on this issue. Keir Starmer having to waiting 6 days to give his verdict on the Supreme Court ruling, and then Downing Street later on pointing out that he no longer believes that trans women, i.e. men, are women. I mean, it's all been very embarrassing. But how damaging in terms of dealing with voters has it been? Is it just a side issue, or is it quite a major issue?
No, I think it is a major issue because I think it just shows how utterly detached vast swathes of the political elite are from normal public opinion. I mean, people just look on aghast. And what I want to hear from the Prime Minister, or indeed anybody else who has apparently changed their mind, is why. I mean, you've got to abide by the Supreme Court ruling, but you don't necessarily have to agree with it.
Yeah.
What other matters of science does Keir Starmer require the Supreme Court to clear up for him? Does he need the Supreme Court to tell us that the Galileo was right and the world is actually a globe, that Newton's law of gravity pertains? Are there any other scientific matters that the Prime Minister needs these judges to provide a ruling on? So why has he changed his mind?
Yeah.
He did say that he thought 99.9% of women don't have a penis. Well, that leaves, I think, in Britain, according to his numbers, 35,000 women who apparently do. I'd like to know who he thinks those people are.
Again, I've done a weekly check for years and still not found mine.
It's absolutely extraordinary. But I think the desperate thing here, and you're right, I'm not trying to be too partisan about it. I think politicians of all stripes in the main political parties come out of this badly. It is ludicrous that this has had to go to a Supreme Court judgment.
Yeah.
That is because our politicians have been unable to grasp the basics of biology, that it has actually had to go all the way to the Supreme Court. Really, how we deal with trans and single-sex spaces and all of the rest of it is a political issue that politicians should decide on. But because they have been so utterly confused in their public pronouncements, we've had to hand yet more power to the judiciary. Over the long run, I think that's a bad thing.
Well, exactly. It is quite... It's a very good point, though, but why? Because nothing has changed. The law is what the law is. Although apparently, as a top KC and a former Director of Public Prosecutions, Keir Starmer couldn't actually interpret the law properly. Do you think on that issue that is going to continue to run? There's no doubt it's been a strong one for Kemi Badenoch. But again, you've got the likes, you know, Nigel Farage at Reform and others who've just been like, well, yeah, of course this is all insane, and they've been calling it out for years. Not in power, not having to deal with, collective cabinet responsibility and the like. But do you think that's still going to be an issue at the next election? Because again, I want to talk about the economy as well, of course, because the economy is the number one issue for most people. They vote based on, do I feel better or worse off than I are? And there's also the cultural side of being proud to be British and having confidence in the future. But does whether men who think they're women or men who are wearing dresses going into women's toilets, is that going to be a deal breaker for a lot of voters?
It might not be that single specific issue, Julia. It might not be that millions and millions of people, cast their votes based on whether trans women can compete in a particular sport, but it goes to this wider picture of the British people feeling that the mainstream political parties are totally out of touch and live in an alternative reality. And the more that the established parties continue to bang on about this completely alternative reality that most, the overwhelming bulk of normal people in Britain just do not recognise, the more likely it is that I think people will plump for, say, Reform UK or, vote for something new and different that seems to be more simpatico with basic, normal, standard, median, mainstream British opinion. So it's one of a number of issues which I think just shows how out of touch the government is.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, I'm always amazed, and the media as well, because the amount of years when I've been doing, BBC or Sky News or other broadcasting, and you say something that's so blatantly obvious and common sense and a majority opinion and fact-based, and the presenter and the producers look at you, I mean, as if you've just... I don't know. I mean, literally said, I think slavery is a good thing. I mean, they genuinely are just living in such a mad little world. And again, why they were surprised as they were by the Brexit vote, which didn't necessarily surprise the rest of us. But you mentioned about the threat of reform. Just before we go to the economy then, I do want to talk about Robert Jenrick. He's the Shadow Justice Secretary. He came second in the Tory leadership contest last year. We know he's still the favourite to take over from Kemi Badenoch. And when there are mutterings about her performance and whether she's, garnering support, Tories are flatlining in the polls, Reform are way above them and consistently so. Robert Jenrick has been obviously completely accidentally recorded while talking to University College London Conservative Association students. And he said in this report, which is Sky News have got exclusively, that he vowed to bring this coalition together to ensure that Conservatives and Reform UK are no longer fighting each other for votes by the time of the next election. He's saying he's working hard to put Reform UK out of business, which idea is, it will be us, not Reform, in the next election. But he says, my worry is that they become a kind of permanent or semi-permanent fixture on the British political scene. And if that is the case, and as I say, I'm trying to do everything I can to stop that being the case, he says, then life becomes a lot harder for us because the right is not united. And then you head towards the general election where the nightmare scenario is that Keir Starmer sails in through the middle as a result of the two parties being disunited. He says, I'm not prepared for that to happen. I want the fight to be united. And so, the crucial words, one way or another, I am determined to do that and to bring this coalition together and make sure we unite as a nation as well. This is code for if we can't beat Reform, we better join them, isn't it?
Well, he's right in what he says, isn't it? I mean, it would be crazy, I think, to look at the present opinion polls and to assume that if you're a Conservative, there's no problem at all. The Conservatives are on a trajectory to victory. And it's the Conservatives' failings, really, that have brought Reform into being. The Conservatives deserted a huge tranche of political real estate, which Nigel Farage was then very happy to go and camp on. So the Conservatives, by no longer being Conservative, have allowed Reform to arise. And I rather agree with Robert Jenrick's comments. I mean, look, God only knows what the opinion polls will look like in 3 or 4 years' time when we approach an election. But if they're anything like they are at the moment, do those on the right of centre seriously want to go into an election with, say, Reform on 24%, Labour on 23% and the Conservatives on 22%? You could re-elect a Labour government that gets less than a quarter of the vote. It would be absurd, especially, and I think this is really the key point, if over the coming year or two, Reform and the Conservatives are light upon a very similar policy agenda. To, leave ECHR, abandon carbon net zero, get tax and spending down. I mean, they needn't be identical. But if the key principles and planks of both the Conservative and the Reform agenda overlap, it might not be a circle, but it could be a Venn diagram with a lot of overlap, then it would seem pretty crazy not to try and find a way, some sort of way of working together in order to take the first opportunity to remove this dire government from office.
Well, would that mean, not a formal coalition? I mean, that's something that Nigel Farage has ruled out again and again, and Richard Tice is deputy. But also, we've got the same issue where, in the 2019 election, people forget one of the among the reasons why Boris Johnson won that 80 majority was get Brexit done. People wanted an end to it or get it done. Jeremy Corbyn was the man he was standing up against, not Keir Starmer. But also because Reform stood down, 250 or more candidates. states. You wouldn't have had that free run otherwise. So are you talking about a formal coalition or just an unofficial wink, wink, we won't stand where you're strongest, you don't stand where we're strongest?
Yeah, I think it's difficult to say what the final, any collaboration could eventually look like, and it would probably depend on the strength of the parties in the polls at the time. Maybe the Conservatives start to tick upwards, maybe Reforms hit their ceiling, who knows? But I think it could be anything from a full-blown merger to, I don't know, standing down in a range of seats for each other, in which you haven't got a snowball in hell's chance in a given seat, but the other party does. It doesn't seem to me very likely that Reform are going to win many seats in the affluent South, but the Conservatives could take a lot back from the Liberal Democrats. Similarly, there are seats where the Conservatives don't really have a presence. About 90 seats, I think, where Reform are second to Labour. Those would presumably be the ones where if the Conservatives were to withdraw, you could see Reform winning them. So exactly how it takes place, or even whether the two parties merge in some way, who knows? It would be a bit like going back to the days of the Liberal SDP alliance back in the 1980s, that the exact, I think, formulation of it is, a long way from being sorted out. And the need for it is only there if the parties remain roughly neck and neck. You're right, Reform are a little bit ahead of the Conservatives, but more or less within the margin of error in the polls. Then I think at some point, some form of collaboration needs to be found. And it'd be pretty useful, I think, if more people were speaking a bit like Robert Jenrick, sort of opening one's arms to the other side, rather than just throwing insults at each other, because that makes it extremely hard to work together down the line if everybody's fallen out with each other before you even get to form a negotiation.
Indeed. Let's finally talk about the small matter of the economy. And Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, is over in the United States for a big meeting of the International Monetary Fund, meeting with other Treasury ministers, just as the IMF slashes global economic forecast, US economic forecast, but also UK growth forecast slashed from 1.1%, whoopity-doo-dah, down by to just 1.1%, down by 0.5 percentage points since the start of the year. And interestingly, the chief economist at the IMF said, look, the Chancellor can't blame Trump tariffs and what's going on in the global trade war. And he says, actually, it's domestic factors that are the biggest problems, surging utility bills and higher government borrowing costs. That's what he says the problems are. Very telling ahead of the autumn budget we're going to get this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, unfortunately, we've backed ourselves into a real corner. We know what brings growth about. All politicians say how much they want it, but they seem to will the ends without willing any of the means. If you actually want growth, you've got to have a much smaller state, less government spending, a much more of a role for the private sector, lower taxes, far less regulation than we have at the moment, and you can start to breathe. Now, obviously, you can catch a good wind or an ill wind from elsewhere, depending on what Trump gets up to or what wars might be going on in the rest of the world or God knows what. But nevertheless, you're under an obligation, I think, to make sure your own economy is as match fit and resilient as it can be. And we are miles from that. And we have to have a serious discussion about what government spending we are going to cut altogether. We are still, I think, believing this fiction that we can keep spending taxpayers' money at the rate we are at the moment and expect to ever pay back our debts or see any meaningful growth.
Yeah, exactly.
1% is pathetic.
I mean, no, it's an embarrassment. It really is. Mark Littlewood, great to talk to you, Director of Popular Conservatism. Claire Pissell, listening to all of that. Look, the Conservatives did not leave the economy in a great state. Again, a lot of that down to lockdown, down to Ukraine. Again, Labour left a very bad legacy for the Tories. But, I mean, it does seem to be, went back after the economic crash 2008-9, but it does seem that Labour have made things worse.
They do, and they've made it worse in quite a short period of time as well. So the recovery from it is going to be enormous, and I don't think we'll see any growth anytime soon.
It's so depressing, particularly I think for young people who are just trying to make a way and getting those early jobs. It's absolutely depressing. And again, this all ties back into patriotism and feeling strongly about your flag and feeling positive about your nation, does it not? 10:47 is the time. Do give us a call on your thoughts on all of the big stories, particularly on reclaiming our national flag, St George's flag for England. 0344 499 1000 is the number. Up next, going to talk about yet more two-tier justice in our nation. That's with Hamish Brown, a former detective inspector at Scotland Yard. This is Talk.
You can pretty much guarantee most years somebody will be murdered.
Yes.
Now,
there were 2 last year, I think, weren't there?
Yeah. So somebody name me another event anywhere in the country where it's pretty much guaranteed there will be murder and those events are allowed to continue.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about drug deaths at festivals and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I'm talking about
an organised event.
Yeah, an organised event where murder is most likely to happen, because I can't think of another one.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 10:51 is the time. Delighted to be joined in the studio now by retired Scotland Yard Detective Inspector Hamish Brown, MB. Very good morning to you. Claire Pistol still here as well. What to talk to you about? I mean, 3 different topics, all related to crime and justice, and all of which I find utterly extraordinary. I'm not going to lie. This is a story today announced by the government that police chiefs will be able to automatically sack officers who fail background checks under new measures, they say, to boost confidence in policing. And there were calls for a change to police vetting procedures after an independent report into the abduction, rape and murder of Sarah Everard by police officer Wayne Couzens back in 2021. Most people would be rather surprised to learn that if you don't pass vetting procedures, if you're a police officer, that you wouldn't be sacked on the spot, but apparently that's not been the case. On what planet is that normal?
Well, I think there are 3 issues here. You've got to get it right. Got to get it right for the public, who must have confidence in the police. And if they see officers who clearly have had a pretty rotten background and have been allowed to remain, that does not help the reputation of the police service across the board. Secondly, what about serving officers, the vast majority of which behave themselves and just get on with their job, and they're pleased to see the back of these officers. And the last thing is getting it right for the accused officer. That's got to be fair in the system, rights for appeal and what have you.
But that's about sort of due process. But the fact that it's actually been virtually impossible to get rid of officers who don't pass vetting procedures, background checks in the wake of Wayne Couzens, because they were, vetting procedures basically were not good enough. He shouldn't have been allowed to join the police in the first place. Yes. Numerous complaints about him, question marks about criminal activity. He could have not had a warrant card at the point when he was able to abduct Sarah Everard, rape and murder her. But subsequent background checks of all police officers and staff in 2024 found more than 400 linked to previously undisclosed misconduct, including theft, fraud and drugs, for goodness sake.
Yeah, I wrote strongly to the Times last year, had their lead letter published, and I made that point that it's got to improve. Yeah. And with these measures it will improve, it will become robust, and the police will be able to kick out the officers they don't want. Yes, it should have happened before now, but be positive, that's what the current situation is.
And again, it does just make you wonder. And now let's also talk about 2-tier crime and justice, because lots of talk about what's been going on in recent years in terms of who can apparently get away with crimes and who can't get away with crimes, but also how you're treated once you are convicted of a crime. Now, the Ministry of Justice has said that it is it's vital that pre-sentence assessments produced for judges by probation officers consider if non-white offenders have suffered from, they say, trauma from racism or discrimination. Now, this is different from the sentencing guidelines that the Sentencing Council wanted to bring into place at the start of this month in April, and then basically told, for the love of God, drop this because it's very difficult and embarrassing for the government, and they were going to change the law because the Sentencing Council basically allowed to pretty much do what they want because they're not really accountable to anybody. So this isn't about who gets any of these reports. This is about what is in a report once they actually get them. And is it really the case that defendants, because they are non-white, should be considered as having suffered trauma? And this is, by the way, if they've experienced this personally, so racism in their own personal life, also intergenerationally, if told about it by friends or family, or if they have, and this is bad, just learned of important historical events affecting groups. So this would basically mean if you are black, in this country, or Afro-Caribbean background, and therefore Afro-Caribbean background likely to have come from a descendant of slavery, that this intergenerational suffering of trauma could be used in your sentencing? That's mad.
The main part of my working life was working in the police, as you know. However, since retirement, I've done all sorts in the criminal justice system, and I have assisted. I wasn't a probation officer, but I've assisted the National Probation Service assessing visits for high-risk prisoners, court work, both magistrates and Crown Court. Yeah. And I have seen the pre-sentence reports, and this is to assist the judge. Is there an option not to send them to prison? Yeah. Would there be an appropriate
But this
sentence?
is about their background, and what sort of background have they been in care? Have they, dad's an alcoholic, mum, or whatever. You've got that's relevant information as what's background. But it's not relevant if you're black that someone in your long distance past was a victim of slavery. That's totally irrelevant to whether you're shoplifting or carrying a knife today.
And that's not what they're putting forward. What they are saying, and I think it's got to be worded perhaps a little more carefully than they've put over, there is a disproportionate number of black people in prison. That's the situation, and correctly someone's looking at it. So what
there's a disproportionate number of black people committing crimes, particular crimes that often lead to prison sentences.
Yes, and we've seen that perhaps with some knife crimes, certainly. But if they are looking at a particular issue in someone's life which has affected their behaviour, for example, because of the racial discrimination, they can't get to college to get the additional qualifications, they can't get that job, but it applies across the board, of course, but it is something that specifically has to be looked at, and I think there's an argument that has not.
Yeah, so but they're talking about the intergenerational problems and important historical events. So if something's happened to your grandma or your great-grandfather, that should be relevant. That, of course, it shouldn't. I mean, maybe I should claim, if I ever go to court, it's only a matter of time, my intergenerational difficulty, I'm Irish, peasant stock. Well, the potato famine. Well, I'm still traumatised by that, so I don't want to go to prison, please. But that's how mad this is.
Well, my reading of it was if, and the big word is if, there are issues highlighted that has affected what I've said about education or getting a job, and they've turned to crime.
There isn't, I'm sorry, but the idea that black people aren't getting, or any ethnic minority in this country are being barred from education or from getting jobs. I mean, look, I know there are some racists. I'm sorry, the stats simply do not bear this out.
No, but you've got to look across the board, and one issue is a disproportionate number of people in prison who are not.
Yeah, but also, and the disproportionate number of people in prison who've been failed by their parents and who don't have a father in their home. That's the defining characteristic.
Oh, absolutely.
Actually, it's nothing to do with race.
So all issues have to be taken into account, but I think the criminal justice system is saying, can we look a little bit
But you
wider?
Didn't have a dad. All right, then, we won't put you in prison because you carried a knife.
Yes, that's
Doesn't
right.
make any difference to the person who has a knife held up to them and their phone stolen, does it? Oh, I'm sorry you didn't have a dad, but could you not steal my phone or my bag?
No, it's looking at the specific backgrounds. Did they not get that development? But at the same time, crime is crime. But the judges must impose the right sentence, and they will be guided.
There's even Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary's ordered a review into two-tier court bail rules, which told judges to give priority to ethnic minority suspects, because often they're saying that not enough ethnic minority suspects are getting bail. I was a little surprised.
I was a little surprised at that measure, I must say. The judges have to decide whether the person's likely to appear at court, commit further offences whilst on bail, or indeed interfere with witnesses. And if they fall foul of any of those, remand in custody would be justified.
I just think most people were just so horrified and unaware that there was this two-tier, and that someone's race, ethnicity, background was being such a factor in what happened to you once you entered the police or the court process or the prison or probation process. And I just think
I would like to have seen it put a little more calmly than the way it's been.
I just think we need to stop this madness at all and judge people as individuals.
It's open to misinterpretation.
No, it's not open to misinterpretation. It's wrong to do it in the first place. I'm going to have to leave it there. Time's against us. You can hear the music. Hamish Brown, MBE, retired Scotland Yard Detective Inspector. Thank you so much for joining us. Going to take a quick break now. Lots more coming up. We'll get Claire Pearsall's reaction as well. This is Talk.
Good evening and welcome to Plank of the Week, the one show where you do not have to be worried about judgmental people because we'll do all the judging for you. Let's just have a look at how Humsley Useless is now spending his time.
Here goes your career, mate.
Over there a bit is over towards where all the migrants come in. He's jumping there. There he goes. He goes over the bar.
Hello,
and
lady.
unfortunately, it catches on his Johnson.
If he's plank of the week, he's got a sizable plank.
That's a whole different show.
Plank of the week, Fridays at 7 on Talk.
Hi, I'm Kevin O'Sullivan, and I've got a message for you. Welcome back to this blockbuster edition of What Just Happened. It really is a good one, I think. It's so funny that people keep calling me Meghan Markle.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good morning to you. It's coming up to 3 minutes past 11. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Great to have your company, whether you're listening on DAB+ radio, on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube, or on your connected device. It is lovely to have you join us, with you all the way until 1 o'clock. Coming up in this hour, going to be talking more about Kemi Badenoch, the Tory leader, who was on fire yesterday in the Commons, and hopefully on fire again at PMQs after midday. We'll take a bit of that live. I'm assuming, maybe a bit on the economy, that she's going to be going for Keir Starmer over what or what is not a woman, after she demanded that he apologises to women who lost their jobs, who harassed in the row over the equality law over the last few years, many years indeed. This comes after the PM finally broke his silence on the Supreme Court's biological sex ruling yesterday, a full 6 days after that ruling, and apparently, we're told by Number 10, dropped his belief that trans-identified men are women. By the way, so if you say trans-identified men, not trans women, much easier to make it clear, that statement, isn't it? Trans-identified men are not women. Meanwhile, J.K. Rowling has accused Keir Starmer of showing a lack of remorse. She says she will never forget, and she's one of the millions of women who are disgusted with how he's handled this issue. What I'm wanting to hear particularly from you about today, though, is St George's Day today. Very happy St George's Day to you. It's not a day that is marked and celebrated by many with such sort of fervour as you get from our other constituent nations of this great United Kingdom. St Andrew's Day, St David's Day, St Patrick's Day. Oh, big celebrations, all absolutely fun. Somehow St George's Day is like, well, you know, England flag. You know what Emily Thornberry thinks of people who carry the England flag. Well, today Keir Starmer has issued a St George's Day rallying cry to the country. He says, in the never-ending fight to reclaim our flag. He's launched a savage attack on those who sow division, who carry the flag, like those who took part in the Southport riots. But I want to know from you, though. He says he wants to wrench the flag out of the hands of those who want to divide our nation, reclaim our flag for our country. But I don't know about you, I kind of thought we already, had the flag for our country, and none of us was actually ashamed of it. It's them that lot, Labour Islington crew, who are the people who are ashamed of our flag. I want you to give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk in your message to 87222. Get in touch on X at talkTV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1, standard network rate message. Oh yes, we're also going to be talking about latest woes for our good friend Ed Miliband, the Energy Secretary. Solar panels made using Chinese slave labour will not now be used by Britain's state-owned GB Energy. Major policy reversal, one of many more to come from Ed Miliband's ministry. Anyway, joining me for all the chat all throughout the show is Claire Pearsall, former Conservative Government Advisor. A very good morning once again to you.
Good morning.
Kat, before we get on to a lot of the topics we're talking about in this hour, I know you're desperate to come back in on what Hamish Brown, our former Scotland Yard detective, had to say about this sort of two-tier justice. Look, you were in the Home Office. You worked in the Home Office. So we've got Labour reviewing two-tier bail rules that apparently favour minorities. We've got the Ministry of Justice saying probation officers must consider the trauma, even historical trauma, of ethnic minority criminals before their sentence. Even talking about genuinely events that have been suffered intergenerationally by their family or friends, or things that they've read about or heard about, how somehow this could impact their decisions to commit crime or their inability to not commit crime, one assumes because of a background, as a descendant of slaves. I'm assuming that's what they're talking about. I'm basically saying somehow that means that this needs to be considered when it comes to probation and when it comes to the report that the judge is going to get about whether that judge should sentence someone to community service or to prison, or for how long to prison. I genuinely think this is immoral, illegal, unequal, divisive, discriminatory and wrong. But this stuff just goes on every day.
But it's absolutely bonkers. I've never heard such a load of old nonsense in my life. What about taking responsibility for the fact that you have committed crimes? And don't worry about the trauma on those individuals in the criminal justice system. What about the victims and their trauma? That doesn't seem to matter to anybody else.
Never seems to matter, does it? But also, I think such an insult. So when they talk about, this is the phrase, genuinely, you see the intergenerational experience of trauma, or even learning of important historical events. You know what they mean by that. Mm-hmm. But you say, if you get two young black men, young men committing a lot of crime, two young black men, both of whom are the descendants of Afro-Caribbeans who were the descendants of slaves, okay? But, we're talking generations, hundreds of years ago. And one black man, black man, goes to college, does well, works hard, straight and narrow, and one chooses a life of crime. Mm-hmm. Are you basically saying that one is choosing the life of crime, that somehow they are the victim in a way that the other one isn't of that historical crime of slavery? That's absolute madness. As I mentioned to Hamish Brown, I've got Irish peasant, pretty sure peasant. From Kerry and Ireland on one side of my family. So I'm sure we were victims of the potato famine. Now, can I use that as an excuse if I commit when I commit a serious violent crime? We all know it's going to happen. Let's just be honest about it. But I just think this is just so outrageous, taking away your personal ability to deal with things. And again, so much of the issues when people talk about and all the sentencing guidelines, the sentencing council, that big row ahead of the change that was supposed to come into force in April, was all about how you're more likely to not get bail, more likely to get a stronger sentence, you're more likely to this, all if you are an ethnic minority. The biggest sentence handed out, which ethnic group? Chinese. No, don't hear about that, do you? If you actually read the actual official statistics. But also, there are many reasons why more young, particularly black men, are getting involved in crime. And it's largely down to things like the breakdown of family, the low value given to schooling and education, particularly in Afro-Caribbean communities. It's not an issue in immigrants from Western Africa, where education and family unit, very, very, very big values, as they are with the Indian community as well, and Chinese communities, that do very well in our country, despite the fact we're all bigoted racists carrying the England flag. Do you know what I mean? But this is the madness. You're talking about socio-demographic issues, socio-economic issues. You're talking about the role of the family, how much your family values education. You take all that out, you can wipe out any racial disparity completely.
You can. You should almost do that on a pretty much daily basis, because those individuals that have those kind of backgrounds that you've just discussed are more likely to go into criminal pastimes. And it's the same if it's a white lad. Let's all be honest. If they have the same family breakdowns, addiction issues, lack of schooling, they are also going to fall into it. You can't make exceptions for one group over another.
Indeed. And again, it gets back to that Netflix documentary, Adolescence, everyone's lost their minds about. Beautiful piece of drama, really powerful.
It was great.
But let's get over ourselves, you know. But again, actually, you know what? The chances of a young white lad stabbing a girl who said no, I don't want to date you, who comes from a happy family with a dad and a mum, you know, both working, you know, and still together, that is virtually zero. It literally virtually never happens because it's about family. It really is. Dads, you matter. You matter. It's as simple as that. And again, here's the thing. This ties into the question I'm asking everyone today about Keir Starmer calling on the English to reclaim our flag for our country on St George's Day, wrench it out of the hands of those who want to divide this nation. Your reaction to that, 0344 499 1000. Now, for me, one of the things that, I see the vast majority of our country and our population, I think 80% plus, of United Kingdom is in England, or most of us are English. But I think for me, in a lot of ways, English and British culture is the same thing. As I know, a lot of Scots and Welsh feel very differently. I do get that. But for me, that, you know, as someone who's grown up in England, born in England, they are the same thing. And so much part of that is the sense of fair play. Is this feeling, you know, this belief in justice and equality before the law and personal freedoms, but also personal responsibility. These things are a really strong part of our cultural heritage. Now, I think often people who haven't travelled, haven't lived abroad, don't realise how unique a lot of these things are to not just Western liberal democracies and modern society, but actually to our nation. And one of the reasons why a lot of people in the in EU, those countries, they don't get why we don't need to be in the EU and don't feel like, oh my God, we won't cope without being in the EU. It's because we are an independent, proud nation, island state, whereas most of Europe, in the last 100 years, has lived under fascism. Of some kind or other, left or right wing. I mean, they have, you know, in my memory, you know, Portugal, you know, has lived under, you know, a fascist dictator. I mean, you know, people forget this. And being proud of your flag is part of being proud of your culture. And if you've got a situation where you feel there is two-tier justice, policing of people on protest, and in terms of the criminal sentence you get, in terms of who's allowed to speak, who's not, who's allowed to be abusive, you know, trans right activists to women, but all not the other way around. And I think that is what we should be proud of, that our flag represents.
We should. This country has an innate sense of fairness. Now, we can take the mickey out of ourselves. We're very good at self-deprecation. If anyone else does it, however, step away. That this is for us. And I think you see it online, social media, my local Facebook page. Everybody fights over parking spaces, youths behaving badly, potholes, whatever it may be. A lady with dementia went missing, and the whole community went out. And within 20 minutes, she was located back with the family. And you just think that is why I'm proud. Because everybody
that would happen in Italy or France as well, wouldn't it?
It would, but they also probably wouldn't have argued about the parking spaces, the potholes and the use down the road. But it was that immediate dropping of all sort of other problems to go and deal with this lady. And you just sort of think, that's why. Part of why I'm so proud of being British and proud of being English. Everybody comes together when they're needed.
And that is crucial. But again, sense of humour and everything. And again, that to me sums it all up. But it's the fact that on St George's Day, you just get all these idiots on social media. Actually, St George was Turkish, and it's like, just so bored with this, And you know, and again, this refusal to accept anything good about this country. But isn't Keir Starmer? I mean, and we had some calls from Susan and Georgina, lots of the messages as well. We're getting on text and Twitter. Talk about how actually, you know, I mean, Susan said, you know, Keir Starmer's part of the problem. He's divided the country. Georgina saying, how dare he? Keir Starmer, she said, is a hater of all things British. But there is a real problem on the left of this country of just not actually being proud of our nation, what it stands for, of the people. Again, we're all just horrible, nasty bigots who voted for Brexit because we're all racist, we're transphobic, we are. All men hate women. I mean, basically every man's a rapist just walking around. You know, these attitudes are just so imbued on the left, and this idea that you can't trust anybody to, you know, feed their kids or brush their kids' teeth, so you have to get the schools to do it. It's that level of just total and utter contempt for the people that I think just, I mean, that's the bit, and that's why we are so contemptuous of them.
And I think it's about control. They want to control everything to the nth degree. As you say, you know, we're feeding children breakfast, we're brushing their teeth, we're keeping them in classrooms to learn about certain things. What happened to free speech being all important? I think we need to embrace all of this again. And I think this issue just shows how far removed those on the left really are from what goes on day to day.
And what epitomises that, of course, more than anything else, is Keir Starmer thinking for many years, and even in only the last 2 or 3 years, saying that trans women are women. Basically, saying man in a dress is a woman. No, he's not. No, you knew that. No. I knew that. Everyone sane knew that. I'm still trying to decide whether he actually believed it. He's too clever to actually believe that madness, so he's just blatantly lying. We're now told by Number 10, after his statement yesterday, he welcomed the Supreme Court ruling last week, took him 6 days, that actually he does no longer believe that trans women are women. But our guest Mark Leatherwood made a really good point earlier. He said, you know, why has the Prime Minister changed his mind? Oh, well, the Supreme Court said it. No.
Yes,
why haven't you? I mean, we're expecting Kemi Badenoch, the Tory leader, who was on fire yesterday at this statement by Bridget Phillipson. She's a former equalities and women's equality minister herself, but she's demanded that Keir Starmer apologises to women. We're expecting her to go for this at PMQs as well.
Yeah, and she should. This is the one issue that she really has him on the ropes over, because he can't make that decision. Why? And I think Mark Littlewood was right when he said, what is it about the Supreme Court that Keir Starmer needs them to decide on every issue that's a little bit tricky?
Yeah. And again,
what's that
it wasn't
about?
Tricky for the rest of us.
No, we managed to not spend a lot of money on a court case on pretty much everything.
Do you expect that since this ruling, do you expect that things are going to change? We're going to talk to Sharon Davies, who's been a fantastic campaigner of this. And one of the people, again, lost her livelihood, lost jobs because of speaking out and saying, you know, saying things. I mean, do you think, you know, as J.K. Rowling says, you know, that he needs to apologise to people?
He won't see that he needs to apologise. He won't apologise. You'll get some Weasley words if you get any at all.
Would you give him credit if he did? I mean, if the Prime Minister stood up today and said, do you know what, I claimed things, you know what, I never really believed it. I wanted to be kind, I wanted to be nice. I got caught up in all the trans sort of, you know, debate. But I actually admit now that what I said was wrong, and I know it harmed women and girls, and a lot of women lost livelihoods and jobs and were, you know, ostracised. And I fully apologise for that. I would have incredible admiration for him for doing it.
But yes, so would I. You know, but I'll eat my hat if it actually happens.
Would he?
Of course, he won't do it. Can you imagine? A, he'd have to show some empathy. B, he'd have to have some forethought in order to be able to do it, and then he'd have to have the guts to stand up there and say it. None of that applies.
I suspect in the Starmer marriage, such as according to internet rumour, the Starmer marriage is still intact. I have no idea. I don't know. No. But I can imagine he's one of those people that if you send him a text message, we've all had this, have we not, as in couple, send a text message, can you get milk on the way home, please? Yes, sure. He then comes home without the milk. This does happen. I know. I'm married. I know. Comes home without me, like, oh, you said you were going to get milk. I did not say I was going to get milk. No, you did. Like, here's your message where you said, yeah, I said, can you get milk? And you said yes. That's I think you're reading that out of context. I mean, that man would argue like on the head of a pin about, and you'd be sitting there going, no, look, it's in black and white. You said you'd get milk. That's why I didn't get milk, because you said you'd get milk. And he would argue to the nth degree. He would drive you up the wall as a husband. He's bad enough as a Prime Minister. Imagine having to live with him 24/7. But that's the. But yeah, he would. I don't think he ever says, yes, sorry, I should have got milk.
Exactly, he'll never hold his hands up. He'd probably get a focus group to decide how wrong his wife was in this situation.
Get someone to put a statement out.
Yeah, the fact is, we've had Downing Street making a statement on his behalf.
Let's get the Supreme Court to rule whether or not you said you'd get milk. Oh, now I accept that I should have got milk. Ta-da! I mean, but that's... It drives me up the wall, that man. Come on, seriously, kiss her. Be the bigger trans woman. Be the bigger trans woman, Keir Starmer. Stand up and admit in the Commons today, you should have got milk. Stand up and admit you were wrong. You were wrong, and that women were wronged, and that what you did was wrong. Maybe you did it for the right reasons. I don't think you did. I think you did it because you got no spine. But say that. I think that people will be quite forgiving. I think one of our cultural traits is we are a fairly forgiving nation.
Yes. Yeah.
I really like politicians who say, soz, messed up, shouldn't have done that.
I have a lot more respect for people that do that.
What do you make of that? Would you accept his apology? I'd love to hear from you. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. I'd love to hear you on the English flag as well. And just finally, let's just go on to Ukraine. We talked about the economy a bit earlier. According to the latest sort of talks which have been downgraded here in the UK in terms of what's going to happen to Ukraine, by all accounts, Donald Trump plans to let Putin keep pretty much all the land seized from Ukraine, and wants Ukraine and the world to recognise that Crimea, for instance, is Russian territory. I mean, I will be out with my England flag on the streets of this city if this government recognises the legitimacy that is not there of Russia seizing Crimean territory.
Well, it just gives Russia the ultimate permission to go and take exactly whatever territory they like.
Give them Poland
of
as
whichever
well.
country they like. Because I don't think they would just stop at Ukraine. I think that there are bigger plans afoot there.
What do you make of Trump and Steve Witkoff and others who just like this idea? He wants to get peace, and possibly by the end of this week. It was in a day, now it's by the end of this week. But then it's not peace; it's surrender.
It is surrender, and I think I almost feel that they're bored with it. That's the impression that I get. They're just like, oh, that's quite difficult. So we just let them win that bit, and you keep that bit of land, and we can all move on.
But that's how dictators work. I mean, the Chinese and the Russians, they work on long scale. Also, Islamic fundamentalists as well.
Oh yeah,
this is a very big thing. Long-term plans over decades, over generations, and we get bored of everything within 24 hours. And that is one of the weaknesses of the West. That's one of the weaknesses, because we don't appear to believe in anything that's worth, not just fighting for, but dying for. I'd love to hear your thoughts, in particular the England flag. Keir Starmer says we should reclaim the flag for our country, because from people who were trying to wreak division in our country. But I mean, I thought it already was the flag of my country. I've never been ashamed of my flag, so why have you been ashamed of it, Keir? Love to hear from you on that. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
You can pretty much guarantee most years somebody will be murdered.
Yes.
Now
there were 2 last year, I think, weren't there?
Yeah. So somebody name me another event anywhere in the country where it's pretty much guaranteed there will be murder and those events are allowed to continue.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about drug deaths at festivals and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I'm talking about
an organised
murder.
event.
Yeah, an organised event where murder is most likely to happen, because I can't think of another one.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk the Home of Common Sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 11:24 is the time. Let's get straight to all your messages coming in about St George's Day and the reclaiming the England flag. That's what Keir Starmer wants to do, he says. Melanie says it seems to me that his rhetoric is always very divisive. Why not call for unity instead? Harry says he thinks we're stupid. Spent the last 6 months doing nothing but dividing us. Weak leader in all forms. Andrew says actions speak louder than words, and Starmer's actions totally speak for themselves. Sam says, what? You mean divide us like you do with two-tier policing? Malcolm says somebody has had a word in his ear, actually pretending to be interested in British people for a change. The comment about those who want to divide the nation should really mean him and his awful government. And Sue says, we don't need to reclaim our flag. Anyone true has always been loyal to the flag, and not just for a bandwagon or to get likes on social media. Dean says, sensible point, finally from two-tier, free gear, no idea, Keir. I love it. I love it. Let's go to this phone lines. Claire Pistol, they're chuckling away in the background. Gina is on the line in Westcliff. Hello, Gina. What do you want to say?
Hi, hello.
Hello.
I just wanted to do a little shout out for my children's old primary school where I now work.
Yeah.
So they are year 7 and 9. So since they've been in reception since my daughter was, since I started there, he makes a big thing of St George's Day. Today I took a picture of him dressed as St George with his horse.
Brilliant.
The children come in all dressed as red and white princesses, anything to do with England, the English flag. Yeah, there's flags everywhere, and then we come into a sea of he does the big loudspeaker of Land and Hope and Glory as we're walking into
this
school.
is wonderful.
So he does that. He dresses up as the Easter Bunny at Easter, which he comes around with all the kids. This is the head master.
We're loving the head teacher here.
I know. And he's just, brilliant. We have nativity plays at Christmas.
Yeah.
He does a big thing about Chinese New Year. He always says, Happy Eid on the social media to all the other religions, but he does make a big thing about St George's Day, and it's never ever gone anywhere.
I mean, and that's one of the things, hasn't it? There's been a big deal in terms of our other patron saints of the United Kingdom. People being proud to be Irish, being proud to be Welsh, proud to be Scottish.
Exactly.
Being proud to be English is somehow questionable.
Yeah, it's like when it's when it's the Euros or the World Football, we're allowed to we're allowed to have our flags everywhere, and the flags are everywhere because it's allowed.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, when the football gone and we've lost, everybody has to put their flags away because otherwise it's embarrassing.
Well, because you were patriotic for a few weeks and then you're a racist again.
Yeah, exactly that. And it's never gone anywhere. It's just. Yeah. It's just.
But the thing is, I've mentioned this before.
Do you ever say anything?
Yeah, I went to school for a couple of years, between 7, 8, 9, in America, and lived in 2 different cities. And in both the schools I attended, even in primary school, every morning we would have to stand up, sing the national anthem, and salute the flag, with our hand over our heart, and that was just considered completely normal. And, of course, you're in America, you salute the flag. And that's about, unifying people. People have their flag, have the US flag, out in front of their home. They're so proud of their flag, whereas we're taught to be embarrassed and ashamed of ours.
Well, exactly. I mean, I'm a lot like me and my family. I'm 52. I'm still on Facebook. We say...
Oh, I lost you there. You're still what? Sorry?
Oh, sorry. And we're still on, I'm on Facebook.
Yeah.
And we say Happy St George's Day. And you get, I don't know, nobody saying it back and nobody liking it because it's almost like, oh, my goodness me, it's embarrassing. Oh, my goodness, Aunt, it's St George's Day. You're not allowed to say anything.
Yeah.
And thank goodness for schools like our school whereby they're proud and they make a big thing of it.
And they're teaching history to kids. They're making it real. I bet someone doesn't come along and go, actually, St George was from Turkey. Gina, I love that. Thank you so much indeed. You've got to find a good head teacher at your school. Go for the head teacher over everything else. Forget the facilities. Head teacher is everything at school.
Yeah, absolutely. My son's school they go absolutely all out on all of these kind of celebrations because, as you say, this is a part of history, a part of your country. My son attends a military school, which is really, really diverse. But nobody's offended by anything. Everybody learns that you can celebrate different religious festivals, but you need to understand them, and they will be there singing for St George today.
When it comes to religious, my rule is, as you know, does it involve chocolate or fireworks? If so, I'm happy to play along, but otherwise I just go along with the things I want to go. Is there a bank holiday involved?
Oh, even better.
That's kind of my interest. But there I'm very straightforward on these things. Let's go to the phone lines again. Graham is in Berkshire. Hello, Graham.
Hi, happy St George's Day.
Happy St George's Day to you. What do you want to say?
Well, there's a few things, but I can't see how Sir Keir Starmer actually can say reclaim the flag when he's got rid of Elizabeth's picture.
Good point.
And Churchill's.
Yeah.
And practically every other person who.
Raleigh, I mean, the main thing is they've replaced the artwork in number 10 and 11 with like the worst. I love modern art, but like the worst modern art ever. I mean, they've got no. So, but again, Shakespeare, didn't they get rid of Shakespeare? I mean, if that isn't somebody who epitomises, British culture and something to be proud of, I mean, that's.
Well, they got rid of Shakespeare and they're sort of saying decolonising because of slavery. We didn't have a colony at the time of Shakespeare. We were fighting to survive.
They're mad. They're mad. So you're saying, look, there's no way that he could be really serious pretending he actually is proud of the flag, because actually he's sort of erasing all of British culture and English culture from the building where he works and lives.
Yeah, if he wants to be serious, give us a bank holiday for St George's Day and actually have the commemoration of William Marshall, without whom we wouldn't have the second Magna Carta.
Yeah.
Commemorate the people who have actually achieved something. I'll probably put my foot in it by saying Barnes Wallis. But no, he's got to. He can talk the talk, but, well...
He doesn't, he doesn't... Well, why do you think that he has said this today, then? Do you think this is about the local elections and the challenge for reform? Do you think that's what it is?
It's about the local elections. It's about diverting away from his failure to come out of what we all know is the truth since we were children.
Yeah.
I mean, a 3-year-old getting suspended for saying what... 3-year-old says what it sees.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Graham, so appreciate it. That's such a very, very good point. Yeah, and just to confirm, Starmer did remove portraits Shakespeare, Elizabeth I, Sir Walter Raleigh and William Gladstone since entering number 10. I mean, basically 4 of the greatest English people ever.
And no apology for it. And yes, there is modern art and there is modern art. The stuff that they've put up in number 10 is pretty bad.
Poor, isn't it? Well, we'll take a quick break. Don't forget to get your calls. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of this. 0344 499 1000. And then we're going to be talking to historian and writer and a former clerk of the House of Commons, Elliot Wilson, about what he makes about reclaiming our flag. Keir Starmer, you might want to listen to this. This is Talk.
Across the UK. On DAB+. On your smart speaker. On your smart TV. And on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense for me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 11:34 is the time. Let's turn our attention to, well, more a conversation about reclaiming the England flag. Not just the British flag, the England flag, the flag for St George's Day, of course, as it is today. The Prime Minister has issued a statement, I mean, obviously in no way related to next week's elections, local elections, but he launched a savage attack on those who, says, sow division, targeting those who whipped up hatred in the aftermath of the Southport killings carrying the England flag. He said that he remembers 1996 and the best of our country. We came together during the Euro football tournament at the old Wembley Stadium. Isn't it weird? He says that's the best of our country. I mean, it was a great time, but I mostly remember it for the beer. But he said, yet now we can see people trying to sow division in our communities, people taking the red and white of our flag with them as they throw bricks at businesses. This is what happened last year in the Southport riots. We must fight it because it was the aftermath of the riots that showed what it means to be English. It marked the coming together of a country. People who got together the morning after, all across Britain, with shovels, brooms and brushes to clean up their communities. He said that this is in that spirit that we reclaim our flag for our country, for English decency, honour and fairness, wrench it out of the hands of those who want to divide this nation and reclaim it for good. But does it need reclaiming? Well, let's talk to Elliot Wilson. He's an historian and writer and a former clerk at the House of Commons. A very, very good morning to you, Elliot.
Good morning, Julia.
Do we need to reclaim our flag?
I think it's the wrong way to look at it, because what the Prime Minister's effectively done is ceded a lot of ground already to extremists, because he's saying, oh, they've somehow claimed the identity of England, of St George, of the flag, and we need to get it back. But there's this curious and extremely irritating sense about what the Prime Minister's doing. It's like somebody who's just discovered a television series that you've been watching for years and is now lecturing you on how brilliant it is.
Yes.
And you think, I know, I was there. And I think it's a very odd way of putting it. And it's fairly nakedly political. And I think it's not even got a veneer of plausibility about it.
Well, this is the thing, and the reaction we've had on the phone lines and online, I mean, people are really, really angry. Susan earlier saying, look, he's the problem. He's the one who's divided our country, particularly with two-tiered justice and the like. And Georgina saying, you know, actually Keir Starmer is bigoted. He's a hater of all things British. This is a Labour leader of a Labour movement with their party, which is very much not patriotic. They want us to be, you know, they don't recognise democratic votes for things like Brexit. They want us to be ruled by bureaucrats in Brussels. They seem to think, you know, Emily Thornberry, you know, Labour MP, that tweet way back when of, you know, of Rochdale, the England flag being flown by, you know, white van man. They seem to actually just think, you know, we're all ghastly, horrible, racist, transphobic, God knows what else bigots. And they're ashamed of us and indeed how we vote and indeed of our history. Isn't that part of the problem, that he doesn't get how most of us don't share his loathing and fear of our flag?
I think there is a strand in the Labour Party, and certainly quite a strong element in Sir Keir Starmer, I think, which looks at patriotism as something that's a bit vulgar, a bit unthinking, and, you know, completely foreign to his way of thinking. It would be fascinating to know why he is so passionate about being English, about England. All he seems to be able to talk about is the NHS, of course, which is the sort of inviolable and eternal symbol of all that's good about Britain, and his plan for change, and maybe 1996. And you think, well, we are a very, very old nation, you know, 1,000 years old, a bit more. If all you've got is the National Health Service, which is in considerable difficulties, a football tournament 30 years ago, and your current set of policies, that's not really much for a national identity.
No, but also, this is a man who constantly says, you know, multiculturalism, diversity is our strength. Whereas actually, our country was very undiverse for many, many centuries until only a few decades ago. And in fact, one would argue that actually that has been our strength, that actually having a monoculture, having something that unites people, that brings people together, shared values. There's loads of evidence that high trust monoculture countries do much better than countries that sort of don't really have anything to unite around, that don't really have anything they all share and believe in.
But I think there's also something deeper, isn't there? There's a sense that if we do have a national identity, both as Britons and as Englishmen and women, there's been no invitation to people who come to live here to buy into anything, because clearly immigration is not the death knell of society in itself, but you need something to say, come and live in our country and buy into a certain set of values, principles, ethics, whatever, and this is what it is. But you all need to be part of the same community, and I think that's the really difficult thing that that a lot of people, particularly on the progressive left, have struggled with. That they can't bear the idea of saying to people, "This is what we believe in, and we need you to respect."
And if you don't know, not just respect it, to sign up to it. If you don't,
Absolutely,
then you're
yeah.
not welcome. But that's the interesting thing is, it's that not only they don't expect people to do that, they've actually, when you say multiculturalism is a good thing, multi-ethnicity, that's fine, I've got no issue with that. But multiculturalism, we are saying that the culture of this country is not superior, it's not the best. Well, why would you want to live in a country that you didn't think have the best culture in the world? I mean, for instance, I want to live in a liberal democracy with equality but I also want to live in a country that has a really good sense of humour and good music. I think we are unique in that. I really do. I think we have a unique place in the world in that. And I don't understand people who aren't proud of the uniqueness of our nation and don't want to protect that.
Well, absolutely. The strange thing about the British, and actually I think it's particularly about the English, is that whereas a lot of countries will say, this is what we're about, this is what we celebrate. Yes, there are complications and it's more difficult than that in history, but we'll deal with that. But this is the headline. Whereas in England and Britain, we seem to say, it's all a bit complicated, so we can't talk about it. We'll just leave it be. And I think that's completely the wrong way to look at it.
But when you say we, the trouble is, it's not we, the people, isn't it? It's the media classes, it's the political classes, it's the establishment. They find it all a bit embarrassing. They still think that, Britain is the worst thing that happened to the world because we're white and there was slavery and the Industrial Revolution and carbon and they just the whole thing is all just terribly embarrassing and awful, and they really wish no one would notice. They're not proud of our nation and our history and our culture and our language and the gifts we've given to the world, whereas I think most British people are.
I think you're absolutely right. I think there is, in some politicians, there's a kind of national cringe that they can't bear to think that we are in any way saying that not only that we're the best in the world, but that we're good at all. And I think if you talk to, the average voter, they will be patriotic. They won't think about it very much because they don't need to. Yeah. It's not something you need to analyse and dwell on. It's an instinctive part of you, but it's part of what makes you part of your culture and your society. But it's when you get people who suddenly realise that it's the 23rd of April and think, oh God, I'd better be patriotic. Quick, what can I say about the NHS? That I think people look at this with great scepticism and think that it's actually worse than saying nothing because it's fake.
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't feel authentic at all. Do you think that genuinely Sir Keir Starmer sort of looks at the England flag, I would say even the British flag, the Union flag, and feels a sense of pride?
To be honest, when I look at the Prime Minister, I have enormous difficulty in working out what he's thinking. I don't understand.
I think he thinks that too. I think he has enormous difficulty working out what he's thinking.
Very possibly. It does seem to swing wildly from day to day. I don't know. I don't think he has an instinctive wish to say, I am English, I'm proud of being English, and these are some marvellous things about England. I mean, I've never heard him talk about, Magna Carta or Shakespeare or William Wilberforce or, any of these kind of, or the foundation of Parliament, which, for all its faults, we've had Parliament for 800 years and it's done a reasonably good job, and we've been a representative democracy of one kind or another.
Well, as Churchill said, it's the worst form of governance apart from all the others.
Absolutely. And I don't hear Sir Keir Starmer talking about Churchill very much either, but then he's probably afraid of the fringe contributions you get about that as well.
Yeah, indeed. You were a clerk in the House of Commons dealing with MPs of yours. Do you think things has got worse? I mean, there have been times when we've been very patriotic, but then people will say, jingoistic over things like the Falklands. Why shouldn't we have been jingoistic over the Falklands and protecting British people and an island state being invaded by a foreign force? I mean, that would be a point when we would do that. But do you think the average MP really gets and is in touch with how the average Brit feels about this?
I think there is an increasing sense of dislocation because a lot of MPs now increasingly are coming from a slightly insulated, university-educated, working in politics, going straight into Parliament class. That I do think there is a sense of isolation and disconnect. But I think there's also a sense of institutions being bad, history being bad, anything old being bad, and novelty being praised as the great god. And I think that's very, very difficult for any nation which wants to have any self-respect.
Fascinating to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us, historian and writer Elliot Wilson. Claire Pissell, talking about this, talking a lot about Labour. You know, this is it's clearly inauthentic and a play for votes, for reform threatening them in those red wall seats. We know a lot of Labour MPs are rather worried, you know, with those council votes next week. But is there a problem also in the Tories with this? Not as bad.
I was going to say not as bad. I think there probably is a little bit of hesitation amongst some members of the party that they don't want to offend anybody. But by doing that, I think you offend everybody.
But that's like, we had a call a little bit earlier talking about her school, kids' primary school, and celebrating George Day and things. And there'll be lots of schools or local councils that say, oh, well, we don't mark these events because we don't want to offend anybody, we don't want to be inclusive. And yet they'll do, like, Happy Eid Day or whatever.
Or Refugee Week.
Yeah, I mean, and you just sort of think, but who is it offending? And anyway, if you live in a country, if I lived in if I lived in France, I wouldn't be offended by Bastille Day. That would be weird. Don't live in France if that offends you.
But surely you need to learn about these things. You need to learn about your own country, your own culture, and it isn't about offending people. It's just about actually learning.
Which is why bonfire night is more important than
love
Halloween.
A bit of bonfire night.
No, I mean, I love both, but it's more important because it's actually about our history.
I was going to say there's a historic connection, whereas Halloween is not a historic connection. It's much more spiritual. But you've got to.
Halloween's just an import from America because of Hollywood movies. We all thought, let's get.
I was trying to be nice.
Let's get dressed up and have some free chocolate. I mean, what's not to like? 11:40. As I say, if it's a festival that involves chocolate or fireworks, I'm in. 11:46 is the time. Coming up next, we're going to talk to the author of Green Tyranny, Rupert Darwell, about yet another major policy U-turn from our good friend of the show, Ed Miliband. This time, it turns out it's not a good idea for GB Energy. We still don't know what GB Energy does, by the way, but this creation of the Labour Party. It's not a good idea that they buy solar panels from factories where they basically are made by Chinese slave labour. Who knew that would be a policy that Ed Miliband would fight against? But he did. That's up next. This is Talk.
If they put themselves in the same position that I've been in since, I've been I'm 74 now. I was born in London. As a child, a very small child, kids were on the streets in those days, you know, because there were not so many cars and all the rest of it. The racism I received, even as a small child, the television, you know, the N-word was not was being used on television until the 1960s.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 11:50 is the time. Claire Pearson also still with us. And let's talk about yet another major U-turn from our good friend, Mr. Ed Miliband. Such a friend of the show, always welcome on, never comes on. Ed, why not? Oh, I'm sorry. I'd asked you questions involving facts. You'd probably not enjoy it. Well, the fact of the matter being that an awful lot of the solar panels that we import to this country are made in basically slave labour camps by Uyghur people in the Xinjiang province of China. Well, apparently, Ed Miliband didn't really have such an issue with that. Well, bit of an outcry. He's been forced into yet another U-turn. Let's talk about this with the author of the brilliant book, Green Tyranny. That's Rupert Darwell. Very good morning to you, Rupert.
Good morning to you, Julia.
I have to say, I think we knew this U-turn was going to come, though. But it is extraordinary that Ed Miliband was basically not ruling out. There was actually, an amendment to a bill in Parliament to try and stop the ability to actually buy any goods which could possibly have been made with slave labour, and he fought against that.
It's a very, very interesting development. It says a lot about his weakness inside the Labour Party, actually. I have to say I'm quite surprised about it, because within the last month, I think he was in Beijing meeting the commissars of the Chinese Communist Party and talking about net zero. And so he's definitely been forced. This is a major development.
Well, and again, and rather a good thing. Now, one of the reasons why we have all our solar, pretty much all of our solar panels and our wind turbines made in China, they export, I think 80% of those bought in the world are coming from China. It's because, the irony, they use coal-fired power stations to create the energy to cheaply make them. They also pay much lower wages, but in crucial parts of the country, people are effectively in slave labour camps. They are forced to work pretty much for free, just for sort of their survival. And I find it extraordinary that any government in this country, let alone a Labour government that professes to be so moral, would have ever said, yeah, that's fine, we'll allow that to happen.
Yeah, it's also, as you point out, it's not just the slave labour that China consumes 50% of the world's coal. Yeah. And what's interesting, the Labour government and Ed Miliband were on notice about this, because when Germany first went for solar in the early 2000s, and Germany was promised a big solar industry, it turned out it was actually the Chinese who scooped up the solar PV sector.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, so much the reliance on moving to solar and wind power will actually mean more reliance on China, which have had this Belt and Road policy for decades now, where they've basically been buying up all the vital minerals, the rare earth minerals and ores that are needed for this. And again, often, and for the batteries and the like, we're going to be totally beholden to China on this. So no wonder he was quite literally kowtowing to them. But it does have issues for the rest of us.
Yes, it certainly does. And the other thing to point out is actually Britain is virtually the worst country in the world to have solar power.
I'm looking out the window now, I know.
Far north. We're on the edge of the Atlantic, where we get these westerlies blowing in a lot of cloud cover. It's completely insane having solar in this country.
Yeah, this is something you and I and everyone else who can see and hear would have known for a long time, but he's still pushing on through. I've been saying for quite some time, I don't think that Ed Miliband survives this whole Parliament. I think possibly not even the next reshuffle. He's been so undermined. Every policy supposedly for growth, Heathrow expansion, everything he is opposed to. I simply can't see that he survives with any I mean, not that he has any, but any integrity. But what's also interesting is how international organisations are now calling out some of these net zero policies. They do it with a wink. They don't say it explicitly because they're all still signed up to the madness officially. But we've had this report from the International Monetary Fund as the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, attends a big summit over in the States, and basically saying that, you know, downgrading the economic forecast for the world, a lot of that is down to the Trump tariffs, but also crucially downgrading the predictions for our economy in the UK down by 0.5% to just 1.1%, which is, you know, virtually flatlining to all intents and purposes. But very crucially, in answer to questions about whether this was down to the Trump tariff war and general economy of the world, the chief economist at the IMF saying that no, this was down to domestic factors like surging utility bills and higher government borrowing costs. Now, I would have thought also down to things like, you know, £25 billion extra taxes in terms of national insurance costs for employers. But interesting, when he talks about surging utility bills, that's code for we have very expensive energy in this country, and that's because of net zero.
That is absolutely right. We have some of the highest electricity costs in the world, and particularly for industrial consumers, they're extremely high. Whereas in Germany, consumers' households actually subsidise industrial users. We don't have that.
We do it the other way round here, almost, don't we?
We do it the other way round, and we are basically destroying any energy-intensive manufacturing, the steel industry, which we know about in this country.
Yeah.
So at last, the IMF is seeing sense. The IMF has been in hock to the green to the private industrial complex for a decade or more. So this again is a very significant development.
Again, it's a significant development, but will it actually change anything? We are not going to get out of our economic woes and get growth while we still have net zero policies. A lot of people, I think, were looking at their energy bills, were quite hopeful when Labour said they were going to get in. They were signed up to as many mad net zero policies as the Conservative government was. I mean, give or take a couple of years on some EV rules, you know. But they were going to create this organisation, this body called GB Energy. And I think an awful lot of people who didn't bother reading the small print were under the illusion that this was going to be some sort of nationalised energy company that would be able to provide us with cheap energy. But I still can't quite work out, what does GB Energy actually do?
Yeah, well, I think Ed Miliband's been trying to work that out. It's been going to put on solar panels, those slave manufactured solar panels on hospital roofs and school roofs. I think there is actually a role for GB Energy, but it's not one that the humiliated Ed Miliband, because that's what's happening. He's being richly humiliated by the Labour Party now, and that is, if you remember, the Conservative government powered past coal, so we basically shut down 20 gigawatts of coal-fired power, and we replaced it with wind. And actually, we need new coal and gas-fired power stations. And because Labour and actually the Conservatives have made that uninvestable, that would be a role for GB Energy to keep the lights on, push bills down.
Yeah, I mean, keeping the lights on, that would be a priority normally. I do find interesting, though, how many people will go for Ed Miliband on this. At the end of the day, he was appointed by Keir Starmer, and Keir Starmer is certainly on paper, and again, who knows, because he doesn't know what a woman is some days and sometimes he does, so we don't know what he thinks about anything in reality, and he clearly doesn't base his thoughts on and opinions on facts. But at the end of the day, he appointed Ed Miliband to the job and is fully signed up to a manifesto that pushes net zero at the expense of basically the economy. So, you know, at the end of the day, this comes down to Keir Starmer and what happens, you know, in his office, not what happens in Ed Miliband's.
Yeah, I think there's a bigger issue here as well, which is the Climate Change 2008, which was actually pushed through the House of Commons by Ed Miliband, with I think only 5 MPs voted against it. So it had massive... And until
that was when he was leader, yeah.
Until you get rid of Section 2 of repeal Section 2 of the Climate Change Act, which has the net zero target, it was 60%, it came down to 80%, it's now 100%. Yeah. Till you get rid of Section 2, we will not be off the net zero treadmill. And so we can have these talks about, well, Ed Miliband's until Parliament, until the House of Commons raises its game and repeals Section 2 of the Climate Change Act, we are heading for very bad.
And maybe this time MPs could find out what it all means and what it will all cost, and they could actually do a cost-benefit analysis and they could discuss it properly. Maybe that would help. I don't know. Rupert Dahl, always good to talk to you, author of Green Tyranny. Claire Pissell, of course, you know, we all mock and laugh at Ed Miliband for this, but the Prime Minister supports all this, and your party still does. I mean, Kemi Badenoch said she's moving away from net zero, but she hasn't dropped the policy.
No, she hasn't, and it's one of the policies I really, really want her to drop immediately, and I think that would bolster support for the Conservative Party no end.
I mean, it's a key plank of Reform UK, and they're doing very well on this. They've been very clear. Word go, this was mad.
Yeah, and that's why they're doing so well, because they come out with a straight answer, whereas I think Kemi is now leaning towards it. She is getting better.
I mean, the Labour unions, it's interesting, they're very much opposed to net zero because they know it costs jobs, because you can't keep manufacturing going, because we've seen what's happening in Germany. Anyway, coming up to midday, we're going to be talking to Sharon Davies about, where we are on the trans issue. We're going to be taking PMQs live, though, because we're pretty sure that Kemi Badenoch's going to be going for Keir Starmer on that issue. We'll get Sharon Davies' response to that. You don't want to miss it. Stay tuned. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
Good evening and welcome to Plank of the Week. It's the one show where you do not have to be worried about judgmental people, because we'll do all the judging for you. Let's just have a look at how Humphrey Useless is now spending his time.
There goes your career, mate.
Over there a bit is over towards where all the migrants come in. He's jumping there. There he goes. He goes over the bar.
Hello,
and
lady.
Unfortunately, it catches on his Johnson.
If he's plank of the week, he's got a sizable plank.
That's a whole different show.
Plank of the Week, Fridays at 7 on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Thank you so much for joining me. Whether you're listening on DAB+ radio, on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube, or your connected device, great to have you company. Any moment now, we're going to be going live to PMQs. I want to hear the exchanges live between Kemi Badenoch and Keir Starmer. Of course, Kemi Badenoch, the Tory leader, has 6 questions. We're expecting, I would think, at least half of those are going to be on when he did decide what a woman was and whether or not a trans woman was a woman in the wake of that final 6-day wait yesterday for the Prime Minister to actually accept the Supreme Court ruling last week that actually a woman is defined by her biology and not by a piece of paper or a man held by a man who claims he is a woman. Kemi Badenoch came out fighting yesterday in the House of Commons in response to a statement from the government on that, and she has called on Keir Starmer to apologise to women who lost their jobs, who were harassed, who faced immense abuse. We're going to be talking to Sharon Davies, the Olympic medalist swimmer and author of the brilliant book Unfair Play, The Battle for Women's Sport, about all of that and get her reaction to what is said at PMQs. Also going to be talking about Ukraine coming up in this hour, and Donald Trump basically saying Putin can keep almost all of the territory he sees from Ukraine, and wanting other countries, including Ukraine as well, to actually recognise that they legitimately own those parts of the country, including Crimea. How could we ever agree to that? We're going to be talking to Peter Cardwell a little bit later in the show as well, talk about the politics of what's going on at PMQs, and of course also talking more about St George's Day, and particularly the Prime Minister's calling on the English to reclaim our flag for our country on St George's Day today, wrench it from the hands, he says, of those who want to divide this nation. Your reaction to that, give us a call 0344 499 1000, text the word talk in your message to 87222. You can send us a message on X at talkTV as well. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text cost £1, standard network rate message. Just like to point out that Claire Pearson is also here. We're going to come to you as well. But Keir Starmer has already wished the House happy St George's Day, which I think is going to be very, very interesting. We are going to be hearing from Kemi Badenoch. There's always a couple of questions from backbench MPs first, aren't there, Claire?
Yeah.
You've watched this many a time as a former special advisor in government.
Yeah, that's right. You always have the same kind of movement of somebody opening up, asking Keir Starmer what his objectives are for the day, not his objections, and then you get on to the random business, and then you get the 6 questions coming in from
well, exactly. I mean, and again, she may choose to go on the economy. Of course, we've got the Chancellor Rachel Reeves not by her side. She's over in Washington, the International Monetary Fund. Yeah. But of course, we've got the downgrading of the growth forecast for this country, given that the number one aim apparently of this Prime Minister was to achieve growth. Everything they're going to do, growth. The exact opposite of that is happening. Let's go live to the House of Commons right now, because Keir Starmer, we're expecting, is about to get his first question from Kemi Badenoch. Let's go, make sure we don't miss a single word of that. Let's go live.
Minister, to discuss those issues.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, can I also wish everyone a happy St George's Day? And can I also associate myself with the remarks about the passing of His Holiness Pope Francis on Easter Monday? Being married to a Catholic, I know the profound loss for millions in Britain and across the world. Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister now accept that when he said that it was the law that trans women were women, he was wrong?
Well, Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. I welcome the Supreme Court ruling on this issue. It brings clarity and it will give confidence to women and, of course, to service providers. The Equality and Human Rights Commission will now issue updated guidance, and it's important that that happens and that all service providers then act accordingly. This government's approach and my approach has been as follows: to support and implement the Supreme Court ruling, and we will; to continue to protect single-sex spaces based on biological sex, and we will; but also to ensure that trans people are treated with respect, and we will; and to ensure that everybody is given dignity in their everyday lives. I do think this is the time now to lower the temperature, to move forward and to conduct this debate with the care and compassion that it deserves, and I think that should unite the whole House.
Mr. Speaker, he can't bring himself to admit that he was wrong. That was the question. But he spoke about respect and dignity and compassion and lowering the temperature. So will he now apologise to the member for Canterbury, the very brave member for Canterbury, for hounding her out of the Labour Party simply for telling the truth?
Mr. Speaker, I've always approached this on the basis that we should treat everyone with dignity and respect, whatever their different views, and I'll continue to do so. And I'll tell you, Mr. Speaker, for why. Because when we lose sight of that approach and make this a political football, as happened in the past, then we end up with the spectacle of a decent man, and he was a decent man, the previous Prime Minister, diminishing himself at this dispatch box by making trans jokes whilst the mother of a murdered trans teenager watched from the public gallery just up there. That will never be my approach. My approach will be to support the ruling, to protect single-sex spaces and treat everybody with dignity and respect. And I believe there's a consensus in this House and the country for that approach.
Mr. Speaker, there is no apology for the member for Canterbury. There is no taking of responsibility. He talks about political football. He practically kicked her out of his party. Constructive dismissal. Constructive dismissal. He talks about my predecessor. What about the abuse I faced from his MPs calling me a transphobe for supporting what the Supreme Court has now clarified in his words? And where was he? He hid for 6 days without commenting on the Supreme Court judgment. Why did it take him so long to respond? Isn't it because he was scared?
Yes. Mr. Speaker, the only fiction here is the idea she delivered anything in office. She held the post of Minister for Women and Equalities for 2 years, and she did precisely nothing. She provided no clarity on the law, did nothing to improve women's lives, which got materially worse under her watch. They talk, for example, about hospitals and mixed-sex wards, uphill and down-dale. What happened in the last decade? The use of mixed-sex wards in our NHS rose by 2,000%. And there's a pattern of behaviour here. Women and Equalities Minister failed to do anything for women. The Trade Minister, who failed to get a trade deal with the US. The Business Minister, who failed to get a deal with British Steel. She's a spectator, not a leader.
Mr. Speaker, I will tell him what I did. I stopped the gender... I will. Yes. When his Labour leader in Scotland was whipping his MSPs to get male rapists into women's prisons, I stopped that gender recognition bill. I helped commission the Cass review. I replaced the guidance on single-sex toilets. I made sure that the puberty blockers issue was resolved while he was sitting there cheering on the ideology that was taking away safe spaces. The Prime Minister stayed silent last week, presumably waiting for what Morgan McSweeney thinks. On his WhatsApp groups, some of his closest ministers were plotting to overturn the Supreme Court decision. Labour MP after Labour MP stood up yesterday and challenged the ruling. How can we take his government seriously on this?
Well, I think the WhatsApp group she should be worried about is the one of his shadow Justice Secretary. Mr. Speaker, the mask has slipped just 1 week before the elections because the Shadow Justice Secretary is not here. A man who's doing everything he can to replace her. The man that most of them want as leader of their party has admitted that Reform and the Tories are working together. He said, I want this fight to be united. He said, he's determined to bring this coalition, he calls it, together one way or another. Well, I think we know what that means. Every Tory voter is appalled at the thought of paying for the NHS. Every Reform voter who hates what the Tories did the last 14 years. They're not Conservatives, they're a con.
Who's playing political football now? He's got no answers, Mr. Speaker. He's got no answers. Yesterday, Labour MP after Labour MP challenged the ruling. He should be more worried about his backbenchers than my frontbenchers. His Labour ministers called the chair of the Equality and Human Rights Commission appalling. Baroness Faulkner's role is critical to enforcing the court's judgment. She has had to put up with relentless abuse, not just from his front bench, but from activists and ideologues. Reappointing her will be a clear sign that he is taking this issue seriously. So will he commit to reappointing Baroness Faulkner when her term expires this year?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've always said the debate should be conducted properly on the principles of debate. I've said it many, many times. But I would remind the Leader of the Opposition that when they were in government, violence against women and girls reached record highs, rape prosecutions fell to record lows, and millions of women were left stuck on NHS waiting lists, unable to get the health care that they needed. Under this Labour government, NHS waiting lists down by more than 200,000, domestic abuse specialists in 999 control rooms. We've strengthened access to maternity pay, something she calls excessive. She talks about political footballs, but a coalition between Reform and the Tories being formed behind her back, we know what that means when the Shadow Justice Secretary and the member for Clacton cook up their joint manifesto.
NHS charging, a pro-Russia foreign policy, end to workers' rights. Just as the Love government lost control of the economy, the borders and health, in 6 short months, she's lost control of her party.
Mr. Speaker, he's clearly so uncomfortable talking about this subject. Yes. This is a choice between a Conservative Party that stood up for common sense and a Labour Party that bent the knee to every passing fad. This is a question about moral courage, Mr. Speaker, about doing the right thing even when it is difficult. And the truth is, he doesn't have the balls. The Prime Minister only tells people what they want to hear. He only tells people what they want to hear. He is a weather vane who twists in the wind. He cheered an ideology that denied safe spaces to women and girls because he thought it was cool to do so. He hounded a brave female MP out of his party for telling the truth he accepts now. And now he is hiding behind the Supreme Court judgment. And isn't that because he doesn't know what he actually believes?
I can only assume that sounded better when she did it in the mirror earlier on. But the truth is, it doesn't really matter what the Leader of the Opposition says, because nobody believes, none of them, that she's going to lead them into the next election anyway. It's going to be the shadow justice. He's away plotting. That's why he's not here today, Mr. Speaker. And the member for Clacton fighting over the bones of the Tory party. And they think Reform are going to give them their votes without changing their policy. Absolutely no way. The member for Clacton's going to do what he always does, eat the Tory party for breakfast.
Thank you, Mr.
OK, well, that was very, very lively. Now, we don't normally take PMQs live because it's not normally as lively as that. As I always say, I like you too much to force that on you. Claire Pearson, just a quick reaction to that. All 6 questions from Kemi Badenoch, all on it. Very, I mean, came out fighting, very personal, even saying things like he doesn't have the balls, he's a weather vane, defending her record, calling him to apologise for what he said before about what the law is and on what a woman is, but also apologise to his own MP. The MP he was referring to, of course, was now independent Rosie Duffield, spoke to her on the show last week. What do you make of that PMQ's exchange?
Well, I think that Kemi Badenoch is better, much, much better, and this is very strong territory for her. But I really wish that she would keep going after him on the point, will you apologise?
Yeah. Stick to one line.
Stick to one line, because if you ask that 3 times, he refuses to do it. There you go, you've got him on the ropes and he gets really touching.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, that's about like learning that technique at PMQs. Well, look, let's talk to Sharon Davies now. She's the Olympic medalist swimmer. She's author of Unfair Play, The Battle for Women's Sport, and has been a long-standing activist on this issue, just basically fighting for women's, girls' rights. Sharon Davies, first of all, lovely to see you. The first time we've spoken since that Supreme Court ruling last week. I imagine that everyone's hangovers have finally subsided that victory. I want to go into that, but just first of all, just your reaction to PMQs and that exchange.
Yeah, I mean, very feisty, obviously. I think what was very telling was every time there was a question, his head was down. He wasn't looking at her, right? And that tells you a tremendous amount. The fact that he wouldn't apologise is absolutely huge. I mean, so many people have lost their livelihoods, have lost their jobs.
You lost your income.
Yes, totally. And
for the crime of saying that you don't believe that trans women are women because they're not, which was always the law and has been confirmed as the law, and you lost your livelihood at one point.
Yeah, for just basically saying that women were entitled to a category free for males. That was what my stance was. You know, all along, it wasn't anti-anybody. It was pro-fair sport based on science and peer-reviewed studies. And what I find very, very frustrating every single Wednesday, though, is that he doesn't ever answer questions anyway. So whoever is asking...
No Prime Minister ever does. It's got to be said. I wish that Kemi Badenoch had asked the question, which actually was suggested by a guest a little bit earlier on the show. OK, you've changed your opinion. You were of the view 2 years ago, you said that trans women are women, Prime Minister, and now you say that you accept the Supreme Court ruling. So that means you believe that trans women are not women. He hasn't said that, but a spokesman for Number 10 made that statement yesterday. Why have you changed your mind?
Yeah, that would be really interesting.
I don't think you'd answer it, but it'd be good to know why.
No, of course. And what I would love to say, actually, is because you and I know, and lots of people that we've been fighting this corner have been speaking to Kemi when she was trying very hard to get things passed, and she was thwarted many, many times by civil servants inside her department. You know, I know for a fact that she was trying so hard to get that Equality Act clarified right before the election, and then the election was called very early, and we were all expecting it to happen, and then it became part of the Conservative manifesto.
Yeah.
But the plan was to get it sorted out before they went into the election, and she did everything in her power to try and get it done.
I remember that. I remember remonstrating with Conservative ministers, both on air and indeed off air, about, but you need to get this through. They wanted to make it a culture war battle and a defining feature of the election. And I was thinking, no, this is too important. This is too important. This is about women's and girls' safety and children. You know, again, but this is the thing. There's been a lot of talk about, like, oh, this great victory and, you know, and how wonderful it is, and everyone's celebrating. In interviewed, you know, one of the women from For Women Scotland that was behind this court case, and I know that, you know, you do a lot of work with, you know, Sex Matters and Mara Forstater and Helen Joyce and others, and they, you know, they were part of this case at the Supreme Court as well. But I wonder, this feels very similar to the publication of the Cass Review into the outrageous giving of puberty blockers to confused children who believed they were trans at the Tavistock and elsewhere. Great victory for common sense. You had, you know, people, you know, across the board, political spectrum going, oh, absolutely, we completely accept it. Although there was nothing in the Cash Review that was actually new. You and I and anyone paying attention could have known a lot of that stuff. We had the, oh, well, the NHS is no longer going to provide this treatment. But now there's been a bit of backtracking. OK, your private clinics can do it. People can get puberty blockers from abroad. People can be part of a, you know, a study that would allow that children to be given these experimental drugs. Are you as fearful as I am that, despite this ruling at the Supreme Court, ways will be found to get round this otherwise clear-cut decision by the court?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and it was always ridiculous that a £6 piece of paper, which could be got extremely easily, you know, what people don't understand, and the mainstream media do not explain this deliberately, that there's no surgery required. There was absolutely nothing required other for you to supposedly live as a woman. Well, what is living as a woman?
Exactly.
And if I was to go and live in the cage in the zoo and put on a spotted coat, does that mean that I'm living as a cheater, and then 2 years later you're going to call me a cheater? It's not true. You know, probably in this country. In the real world. Exactly. So this is about reality, and I think that maybe the one thing that might come out of this, and did come out of the Cass report, was that we were allowed to talk about this a bit more, that people were given a voice. I mean, I think today actually on Women's Hour, you know, those brave women from Scotland were actually allowed to speak. That is the first time in 10 years that they've been allowed to go onto the BBC and speak and to put the other side of the argument. So maybe that will be a very big
BBC pretty slow on this one. Women's. I mean, again, I'm appalled by the idea there is Women's Hour anyway. How offensive! What, men get the other 23 hours? It's an absolute joke anyway. But the biggest single issue for women's rights in the last decade, and they barely ever touched it. If they've done, they've always done it from the point of view of the men dressing up as women and claiming to be women. In terms of Keir Starmer, though, we're told he now accepts that he was that the Supreme Court ruling. He hasn't admitted that he was wrong. He hasn't admitted not only that, I mean, it's clearly insane to claim that you believe that trans women are women, because why would anybody who's got eyes and ears, and certainly a highly educated man like himself, believe that a man could become a woman? There's no medical or any evidence that that could be the case. Would it make a difference to you if he had got up, you know, the day of the Supreme Court ruling even, and said, you know, I'm sorry. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was being kind. I was worried about this minority group. Now I realise that what I did was wrong, and I'm really glad that the Supreme Court has clarified it. I'm going to do my best to make sure I protect women's and girls' rights. You know, obviously we can be respectful and protect rights of trans people, but those rights do not include using, you know, getting women's rights. Those are two different things. And I was wrong, and I'm sorry, and I'm really sorry for all the people who have been hurt by this, because there are many thousands of women who've lost their livelihoods, men and women who've had their voices taken from them because of getting disciplined at work when they talk the most basic biological fact in a very calm and respectful way. We've seen women who've lost out on medals, on getting onto sports teams, on even winning, you know, park run for, records and the things like that. Women who've had the abuse, I mean, the rape threats, the murder threats against people like J.K. Rowling and others. If he did say, I'm sorry, I got it wrong, and I realised the error of my ways, would that change things for you?
I mean, it would be nice to hear. I don't think it would change absolutely anything. I mean, the gaslighting that we've seen in the last, 6 days from numerous Labour politicians that have that we've got all of the evidence, on Twitter and all sorts of other TV programs that they've done saying, trans women are women. And, that can't just disappear overnight. People don't just all of a sudden change their opinions. The sad truth is we have to be so careful with our politicians. I don't know how we get around this, because it's become such a huge problem that politicians will say whatever gets them the votes. They won't say what they necessarily believe. They won't say what's in the interest of the general public or the interest of our country. This is now about the interest of their job. And I just feel very sad that that's where we have now got with politics, full stop. These people are no longer serving us, the people. They're serving themselves.
Well, and again, I don't know. I never understood why they thought it was something to say that people would agree with, when most people were going, "You're all crazy for thinking that." And again, it's one of the reasons I said we need to stop using phrases like trans women, because lots of people in the general public, I think, oh, they must be a woman, or at the very least, they're a man who's cut their bits off and has somehow grown a vagina and breasts, and is now literally a woman, and you'd never know. Whereas the vast majority of people, even the ones with gender recognition certificates, haven't even had a single hormone, and it wouldn't make a difference anyway. They'd still be men, full stop, end of. But here's the thing. Bridget Phillipson yesterday, she's Education Secretary but also Equality and Women's Minister. She was another classic one who sort of, oh, I've never said this. Yeah, you did. You literally said it, a few weeks ago, that trans women are women.
Do you know what's really fascinating, Julia, is just ask the simple question: why do we have a separate men and women's category in Well, we know why, okay? Why do we have separate toilets for men and women? Well, we know the answer to that. So what is the criminal behaviour of trans-identifying men? Well, do you know what? It's actually worse statistically than men. Yeah. So why would we actually turn around and then say, well, then they can go in the toilets? Yeah. None of that makes any sense when you look at the actual facts and the stats.
Oh, but we're constantly told, we're told that the trans-identified men who call themselves trans women, they don't want to go in the men's toilets because it's unsafe for them. And then you go, and why is it unsafe? Oh, because there are men in there. Oh, really? Do you think there was a reason why we wanted our own toilets and changing rooms? It is quite bizarre, isn't it? But I just want to say, Bridget Phillipson, though, yesterday, one of the things she was talked about how we want to protect trans rights. Absolutely. I'm not quite sure what rights trans people think they don't have that everyone else has. But also talking about how stopping, oh God, I've never read what the phrase is. When you have these Christian groups that basically try and basically de-transition you, can anyone help me in my ear? This idea that we would stop people from being basically, talked out of being either gay or conversion therapy. Someone's just shouted at me, conversion therapy. She mentioned that in her statement yesterday. Now, one of the concerns about the bill on conversion therapy, Sharon, was that a parent, a teacher, or even a psychotherapist, and a child who's confused and is, for some reason, thinks they're born in the wrong body, to actually say to that child, you're not born in the wrong body, you have other issues, that would be banned under that law.
Yeah, and that would be really, really wrong, because the problem is we have got a mental health crisis in our young people, as we know. And again, if we look at the statistics of young people that are trying to identify out of their biological sex, it's 5 to 1 for girls to boys, which again is never really talked about. All right, we only ever talk about how this affects men. We're not talking about how it affects women. Why are they wanting to identify out of their biological sex? The autistic numbers are off the scale. Children that come from vulnerable backgrounds, children that have been sexually abused, all of these numbers are off the scale, which was in the CAS report.
But also gay children.
Yes, and gay children. So we're almost transing away the gay. Yep. That's what we're doing. We're telling children that it might be more effeminate or slightly more masculine, that then they must be in the wrong body. And we're giving them chemicals and drugs which will ruin their lives. It will make them sterile, it will make them ill, and it will potentially shorten their lives. And it will make them customers for the pharmaceutical industry for the rest of their lives. Kids that probably would have just grown out of this dysphoria if we'd given them support throughout puberty. Absolutely. What's really important to understand, puberty is not an illness.
Yes.
It's not, but it's being treated as if it is.
And again, this is part of the medicalising of normal human emotions, worrying about your body and your sexuality and things like that. Just finally, PMQ is still ongoing. We're not taking the rest of it, though we're going to be hearing from Peter Caldwell about what else has happened. But just finally, Kemi Badenoch, in the exchanges, she calls on the Prime Minister to accept he was wrong. She called for an apology as well. I just want to ask you just finally, Sharon Davies, what do you think that Keir Starmer has all this time really thought? Do you think he genuinely believed that a man who, with or without hormones, with or without surgery, with or without a gender recognition certificate, actually was a kind of woman? Or do you think he was just saying that?
I think he was just saying it. You know, I think it was just a political line.
Which is worse, though? Which is worse?
Yeah. Well,
that's
the political line for me,
because either a liar or crazy.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just, you know, having the integrity to tell the truth. And I think if you're a public servant of any sort, you should be doing that. You know, you should be trying to tell the truth. And if you realise you've made a mistake, then you should be extremely humble and say, look, I've made a mistake. And there was nothing humble about the way he was answering those questions today. He was being incredibly defensive. Yeah. I'd love to see the FA, you know, to apologise to some of these young girls who they banned for recognising that they're going to have to play against males on the opposite team, right? I mean, you know, the abuse that women have had in all sorts of spheres have been absolutely catastrophic.
Oh, I mean,
and those women that are sitting behind him nodding away whilst he's saying these things, they should be ashamed of themselves.
Absolutely. Can I just say, lawyer up, everybody. This is going to be a very expensive and rocky road. Sharon Davies, you're still one of my heroes. We love you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. 12:29 the time. Let's take a break. This is Talk.
If they put themselves in the same position that I've been in since I'm 74 now. I was born in London. As a child, a very small child, kids were on the streets in those days, you know, because there were not so many cars and all the rest of it. The racism I received, even as a small child, the television, you know, the N-word was not was being used on television until the 1960s.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good afternoon to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense. 12:32 is the time. Let's talk about Ukraine right now. Don't forget, we're going to get more of your calls in just a couple of moments on the England flag and Keir Starmer calling on the English to reclaim our flag for our country. It's interesting that only came up just wishing everyone happy St George's Day at the beginning of PMQs before those very, very bitter clashes between him and Kemi Badenoch on the trans and women's rights issues. We're also going to be talking to Peter Cardwell very, very soon about what else has happened in PMQs, and also those references from Keir Starmer you've heard to what Robert Jenrick is up to. Is he on manoeuvres for the leadership of the party? We'll talk more about that. Right now, though, let's talk about Ukraine. Edward Lucas is a columnist at The Times and a security specialist and joins us now. Very good afternoon to you, Edward.
Hello, Julia.
Thank you so much. We've got these ceasefire talks in London and they're being held, but they have been downgraded, we're told, and will no longer include the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio or the Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. He's maybe got a round of golf to play with Putin. Who knows? That's what he mostly seems to be famous for. Instead, the meeting will take place between senior officials with the UK, France, Germany, Ukraine and the US. And the UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy is hosting a bilateral meeting with his Ukrainian counterpart. But a lot of this is about what Trump is proposing in terms of a ceasefire deal, which as far as I can tell isn't a ceasefire deal, it's a mass surrender deal, isn't it?
Well, Julia, I wish you were Secretary of State. I don't know whether you played golf or not. You've put your finger on it, and this isn't a ceasefire, it's a surrender deal. It's where Russia gets basically everything it wants, and Ukraine gets next to nothing. And I think that what's going to happen today is the Ukrainians are going to say this is a bad deal, and their European allies are going to say it's a bad deal. And then the question is, what do the Americans do about that?
Yeah.
And the big worry is that Trump's basically decided he prefers Putin to his European allies. Yeah. And if he chooses to go down that path, we're going to find things getting very nasty very quickly.
I mean, it is absolutely fascinating how, he's made such a big play of this, Trump, in the election and others. Look, we're spending a load of money. They're not grateful. This is Europe's problem, not my problem. And I'm going to get peace straight away. And he's basically, handed the ball into the court of Vladimir Putin, who was just playing. I mean, he's literally just playing him like a puppet. But his thing, I've always wondered whether actually we just need to PR this. We need to get people on Fox News that Donald Trump watches religiously. It's pointing out that he looks weak. He's being laughed at by the world, and he looks like a weak surrenderer. What we call the French, the cheese-eating surrender monkeys, a McDonald's-eating surrender monkey when it comes to this, and he looks weak compared to Vladimir Putin, because I think that might get him to sort of wake up to the reality. But they're basically talking about Putin keeping almost all the territory he sees from Ukraine, not just Crimea, but also the regions in the Donbass area region. But also Ukraine and the West recognising Crimea as Russian, not even a de facto, we freeze the fighting here but no further, but recognising Crimea as Russian. That would never be acceptable to the Ukrainian people.
It makes one wonder whether Trump's ever read the book called The Art of the Deal.
He didn't write it, we know that.
We know he didn't write it. I begin to wonder if he ever read it. I mean, it's a very weird negotiation where from the very beginning he's gone in handing over concessions to Russia, which might be things you'd have to give away as part of a deal. Will Ukraine join NATO this year, next year, sometime or never? That's a negotiating chip. Will we accept some kind of Russian de facto control over some Ukrainian territory? Again, might be, but to give all this stuff away at the beginning is bonkers, basically. And I think it's not going to fly.
Yeah.
So the question really is what happens when this proposal crashes and burns, and that's I think terra incognita for us. We just don't know. We have no idea how.
Well, let's think about what the options are, because I can't see in any way that the European leaders who've stood firm with Zelensky over this and tried to stand up subtly and kindly as they can to Donald Trump, even Macron in the Oval Office, that they would agree to that. I mean, everyone I think is at a point where, if the US pull out, OK, the Europeans can't get their act together quickly enough to sort of actually carry on the fighting without US help. In which case, OK, you go for a ceasefire. But at that point, there has to be no legal recognition that Russia has that territory, just a settling of the lines right now. But crucially, there has to be a security guarantee that is absolutely 100% for the rest of the Ukrainian territory for them to ever be able to agree to that. That is not forthcoming from the US, doesn't appear to be. The Europeans basically aren't in a position to do that. This coalition of the willing seems to have gone remarkably quiet in the last few weeks. What are the options? If the Ukrainians say, we're going to keep on fighting, then they're going to keep on fighting.
They are. And I think Trump hasn't perhaps realised that the Europeans contribute considerably more than the Americans do in cash terms. And you have countries like small countries who've done a huge amount relative to their size, and also quite big countries that have done, Denmark's done a fantastic job. And there's plenty. What the Ukrainians need most of all now is money. They have a very good defence industry, probably the best defence industry in Europe. And what they most of all need is to run it at 100% capacity rather than half capacity. So that's something.
Well, we could give them all of the Russian money, all the money that's been frozen in European banks. Hand that over tomorrow, no problem with that.
Well, we need to do that quick because the Hungarians are going to veto that next time the vote comes up on the freezing of that. So there's plenty we can do. I think the idea of putting Western troops or British or French or whatever troops into Ukraine is very questionable. If we weren't willing to do that when Ukraine was winning, why were we willing to do that when they're on the back foot? So that, I think, and what would happen if Russia attacks them? Do we send a cross press release? Do we shoot back or what? And sadly, 30 years of neglect means that Europe's not in a state to do for Ukraine what we did for West Germany during the Cold War.
That is the worry, isn't it? Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Edward Lucas. He's a columnist at The Times and security specialist. Thank you. Just actually some breaking news. J.D. Vance, the US Vice President, on a visit to India at the moment with his family. He swore that Ukraine and Russia must accept the US peace proposals or face the US walking away. He said it's time for them to either say yes or for the United States to walk away from this process. Now, that's just echoing something that was said at the weekend, wasn't it, Claire Pissell? That's fine. OK, US, you walk away. But at the end of the day, if you walk away, well, that helps Russia, not Ukraine. At that point, I don't think the Europeans have any choice. They have to step in.
Yeah, they do, and they should have been stepping up a long time before this.
Absolutely.
And I think this has just highlighted how badly prepared they actually were for a war on their borders.
Absolutely, again, which Putin said he was going to do. But there we are. 12:39 is the time. We're going to take a quick break. Then we're going to get to your messages coming in about PMQs and about the England flag. After that, we're going to be talking to Peter Cardwell about what more happened at PMQs and what is Robert Jenrick up to. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon to you. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense. Claire Pissell still with me. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Let's get to your calls coming in thick and fast about St George's Day today and the Prime Minister calling on the English to reclaim our flag for our country, reg it out of the hands of those who want to divide this nation. Most of you have other messages on Twitter and on X and indeed phone calls so far basically said it's people like Keir Starmer who've divided our nation mostly. Let's go to Dave, who's in London. Hello, Dave. What do you want to say?
Hi, Julia. It just beggars belief. I have my head in my hand day after day these days. But if you think about the two types of groups he's trying to appeal to, one, the people that have already proud of the flag, they will be reacting. Just about every single caller you've had coming on this morning is reacting and saying, could this guy become any more hypocritical? And on the other side of the fence, if he's trying to appeal to people on the other side of the fence, then they'll be saying, no, as far as we're concerned, that flag stands for the Crusades, bigotry, and all that kind of stuff. And therefore, why are you trying to tie us to that flag when we've got plenty of other flags that we like? The Palestinian flag, the trans flag, the
EU flag.
The EU flag. We've got the flags, and that's the one flag that we don't want. But this whole concept of a never-ending fight for our flag. What is he talking? And then he talks about our values, and the values he's got is decency, honour, and fairness. Well, let me give you three more, Mr. Starmer. Sincerity, honesty, and integrity, which is essentially the opposite of hypocrisy, are also English values. And you, Mr. Starmer, couldn't be further away. I know Kemi Badenoch's already had her time, but if I was her, I'd have gone with 5 questions, and I would have said, would the Prime Minister join with us to make sure that all of our police officers who are English in the country now have a Cross of St. George on their uniform? Because don't forget, they tried to get rid of the thin blue line flag. They banned it with the Met Police.
I don't think they should. I don't think you should. On official uniforms, I don't think you should have any insignia at all like that, personally.
But it would have tested his resolve to get his flag back, and then, or maybe say, in my high street, I've got a trans flag now as a pedestrian crossing. Can I have a red and white crossing, like the black and white zebra crossing, to reclaim the colours of our flag? And on all of these things, he will just go no. And to stand there with that silly bit of bunting, which looked like something that my nan used to have,
I love it. Dave, I just wish that you felt strongly about this issue. Dave, it's such a great call. Thank you so much. I'm going to have to move on, though, because I just want to squeeze another call in before we have to take another break. Stephen is in Manchester. Stephen, what do you want to say?
I would like to say that I'm a passionate Englishman, and I believe that it's vitally important that we have our own representation, our own parliament. Because
I mean, people just sort of roll their eyes at that, but it's okay for the Welsh, for the Irish, for the Scots. No one questions that.
Yeah, the Celtic fringe have their established parliaments, and that actually changed the agenda into the distant future where Great Britain's concerned. But who will speak for the English? And the danger with England now is that the political establishment, through mayoralties and regional parliaments, will try and carve up England and dispense with the notion of England. I mean, England gave so much to the world. We're such a profound nation and part of the United Kingdom, the real driver behind it all. I want my own representation. I want an English parliament.
Very interesting. Thank you so much, Stephen. Appreciate that call. Claire Pearsall, final word on that.
It is interesting, but there is a mechanism in the House of Commons to sit in Grand Committee mode when you are discussing
Purely English matters.
Purely English matters.
So if it's health and it's devolved to Scotland or Wales, then those MPs aren't allowed to vote on those issues?
Absolutely not. No, you're going to Grand Committee mode and it is English votes for English issues.
All right then. And in terms of, just finally, the Prime Minister on the flag, do you think that he sounded sincere?
No, he didn't. There was no authenticity there. I really wanted him to come in wearing a Union Jack tie or, have a handkerchief in his top pocket, just in case, just to show us that he really meant it.
But no, the voice is going to get...
I'll just carry on talking.
Let's go to a break. Peter Cobble up next. Big thanks to Claire Pearsall. Thank you.
Other than Nigel, there's nothing there. Nigel is the be-all and the end-all of reform, and therefore they're very dependent on him. And if Reform got this huge number of seats at the next election, how would it form a government? Who would the Chancellor of the Exchequer be? None of these questions are answered, and I think as we got closer to a general election, those would be questions at the forefront of people's minds. So I would very much like to see a cooperation between Reform and the Conservative Party, as I think most Conservatives and most Reform supporters believe in broadly the same things.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good afternoon to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense. I'm here. Luckily, somebody who hasn't got a cough is the Talk presenter and political commentator, Peter Caldwell, who's also here. A very good afternoon to you.
Hi, Julia.
Now, as you know, normally on a Wednesday, we get you to watch PMQ, so we don't have to, because often it can be a bit of a Yawnsville, whether there are any highlights or not. You are here with some of the highlights, because we took it live. I have to say, we thought Kemi Badenoch was going to go in hard. She was on fire yesterday, on fire today. I very much don't think these two people like each other, Keir Starmer.
They certainly don't. They certainly don't. And he did all he could. You've seen the trans answers, because I know you took them live a little bit earlier this hour. But in the rest of those exchanges, it was all about Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary.
Wasn't it?
Yeah, because he, of course, gave this talk. He thought it was private to a Conservative.
Did he?
Yeah, well...
No, explain the context for people who've got lives.
So the University College London has a Conservative association. These are students
I'm surprised by that, London University.
So am I. But they asked Robert Jenrick to come along. He spoke to them. He said that he wanted closer ties with Reform, and certainly he wanted some sort of unity in terms of what the election would be.
And I want the fight to be united, one way or another. I'm determined to do that, to end and to bring this coalition together and make sure we unite as a nation as well. Basically, don't have Tories and Reform
fighting against one another.
It out, and
so
then,
maybe something
Labour getting in.
Maybe something like 2019 with the Brexit Party. Yes, he said, and then you head towards the general election, where the nightmare scenario is that Keir Starmer sails in through the middle as a result of the two parties being disunited. I don't know about you, but I'm not prepared for that to happen.
I mean, now again, he keeps making statements that somehow become made public. What a silly mistake to make yet again and again.
Yes.
But this was very much brought up by the Prime Minister in one exchange. Let's have a little watch and a listen to this exchange.
Shadow Justice Secretary is not here, a man who's doing everything he can to replace her. The man that most of them want as leader of their party has admitted that Reform and the Tories are working together. He said, I want this fight to be united. He said he's determined to bring this coalition, he calls it, together one way or another. Well, I think we know what that means. Every Tory voter is appalled at the thought of paying for the NHS. Every Reform voter who hates what the Tories did the last 14 years, they're not Conservatives, they're a con.
Who's playing political football now? He's got no answers, Mr. Speaker. He's got no answers. Yesterday, Labour MP after Labour MP challenged the ruling. He should be more worried about his backbenchers than my frontbenchers.
Interesting to start with an answer from Keir Starmer.
Yes, well, I'm going to do that
response.
again in the next clip as well, because this kept going and he kept mentioning Nigel Farage. He kept saying that there was...
All the questions were about the trans ruling.
Yes.
Let's say the women's rights ruling, the factual biological ruling from the Supreme Court last week. And Kemi Badenoch went on. It was all about asking the Prime Minister, did he accept that he was wrong? Will he apologise? And her role. And she has been. I mean, the Tories did a pretty poor job in government, but as Equality and Women's Minister for a number of years, she was absolutely on the spot on this and was doing stuff behind the scenes and working hard. But he kept going back to Robert Jenrick. He kept going back to Reform. He mentioned the Nigel Farage repeatedly, the MP for Clacton. But this was, for him, this was all about local elections are next Thursday.
Yes, I think there are two leaders of the Conservative Party at the moment. There's Kemi Badenoch and there's Robert Jenrick, and she clearly has no control over Robert Jenrick. Keir Starmer knows that's her weak spot. He knows the trans debate, the women's rights debate is his weak spot. She asked all 6 questions on that, really for the last 2, and including this clip now. He basically ignored her and kept talking about Nigel Farage and Robert Jenrick.
Which is kind of what PMQs usually ends up being, isn't it? But let's have a watch and listen to this clip too.
Shadow Justice Secretary and the member for Clacton cook up their joint manifesto. In 6 short months, she's lost control of her party.
Mr. Speaker, he's clearly so uncomfortable talking about this subject. Yes. This is a choice between a Conservative Party that stood up for common sense and a Labour Party that bent the knee to every passing fad. This is a question about moral courage, Mr. Speaker, about doing the right thing even when it is difficult. And the truth is, he doesn't have the balls.
I can only assume that sounded better when she did it in the mirror earlier on. But the truth is, it doesn't really matter what the Leader of the Opposition says, because nobody believes, none of them, that she's going to lead them into the next election anyway. It's going to be the Shadow Justice Secretary. He's away plotting, that's why he's not here today, Mr. Speaker. And the member for Clacton fighting over the bones of the Tory party. The member for Clacton's going to do what he always does, eat the Tory party for breakfast.
Fascinating that in questions from a woman about biological reality, a woman, the male Prime Minister spent the entire time talking about 2 other men. Totally irrelevant to that issue. Now, it was interesting that, of course, Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary, was not there. Look, no one is under illusions that he's not on manoeuvres.
Completely.
And that although Kemi Badenoch has played an absolute blinder this week, there is an element where, you know, a lot of people feel, and certainly the polls suggest that she hasn't quite made the grade in terms of you know, leading the Tories. We know Reform are riding above in the polls repeatedly. In terms of the likelihood of any deal being done, we go back to you know, Lib Lab pacts. You know, I can remember from my lifetime, you know, in the 70s, we talk about you know, what happened in 2019. And Nigel Farage is very, very clear that his fingers were burnt that time.
Yes.
He stood down his Brexit Party candidates in hundreds of seats, and that is one of the reasons why Boris Johnson won that big majority. He felt that he was betrayed by Boris Johnson in terms of the Brexit that was delivered. He said, never again. Do you believe him?
I don't, and I think that I don't believe Kemi Badenoch in that she says there will be no coalition or electoral pact or
even
whatever.
Just unofficial, we won't stand in the seat you're strong in, you don't stand in the one we're strong in.
Possibly, those deals are done, or we'll take the foot off the gas in some of those different fights. What's going to be really interesting, not often I say this, what's going to be really interesting is the Welsh Senedd election next year.
No one has literally ever said that before, including in Wales.
Because I think Reform are going to do really well. I think they could be in government, possibly in coalition with the Conservatives, maybe even as the largest party in the Welsh Senedd after those elections. It's going up from 66 to 92. If that happens in Wales, Kemi Badenoch will be in a really tricky position. And that's if she lasts that long.
I mean, that's a lot of people are saying that after next year's local election. We know that the Tories are predicted to do badly in these local elections because the last time these seats were fought was at a high mark.
Peak Boris.
Peak Boris in 2021, you know, just survived, you know, COVID and the like.
Well, it was the Hartlepool by-election as well when Keir Starmer thought about standing down at one point. So, no, the Conservatives will do...
Look at what could have been, everybody. Look at what you could have won.
The Conservatives will do badly. Labour will do fine, better, and Reform will do very well.
Just finally, really briefly, I was really intrigued by, you know, calls from Kemi Badenoch on the trans issue for the Prime Minister to apologise, accept he was wrong. That's just not his temperament, is it? He's not a man. We were saying earlier, if he forgot to buy milk and there's a text message saying, I'll buy milk, he would never admit he was wrong when he didn't buy the milk.
That's very true. And I think that they're both very strong characters, certainly, and I think we're going to see a lot more of that as time goes on.
Absolutely. Fascinating. Really great to have you in Peter Cowell. Great clips there. Delighted to be joined now by Ian Collins. Tell us what's happening on his
show. Well, I heard your milk analogy a little earlier. I thought it was rather good. I live with this scenario every day.
You're married, mate.
Yesterday, I literally sent a text saying, can you get some milk? Get one of the really big ones.
Yeah.
We
always said big red milk, red milk.
Come back with a small one.
Oh, no.
It's like, it couldn't have been... I even wrote it in capitals.
Easter Holes texted my daughter, can you bring some milk back? Because I thought we'd had milk. This is family life, right? The glamorous life we all lead. And she came in, I went, where's the milk? She went, oh, no. I said, I only asked you because you're more reliable than Dad.
And it still didn't